Chapter 1. The House of Loring. In the month of July of the year 1348, between the feasts of Saint Benedict and of Saint Swithing, a strange thing came upon England, for out of the east there drifted a monstrous cloud, purple and piled, heavy with evil, climbing slowly up the hushed heaven. In the shadow of that strange cloud the leaves drooped in the trees, the birds ceased their calling, and the cattle and the sheep gathered cowering under the hedges. A gloom fell upon all the land, and men stood with their eyes upon the strange cloud and a heaviness upon their hearts. They crept into the churches where the trembling people were blessed and shriven by the trembling priests. Outside no bird flew, and there came no rustling from the woods, nor any of the homely sounds of nature. All was still, and nothing moved, save only the great cloud which rolled up and onward, with fold on fold from a black horizon. To the west was a light summer sky, to the east this brooding cloud bank, creeping ever slowly across, until the last thin blue gleam faded away and the whole vast sweep of the heavens was one great leaden arch. Then the rain began to fall. All day it rained, and all the night and all the week and all the month, until folk had forgotten the blue heavens and the gleam of the sunshine. It was not heavy, but it was steady and cold and unceasing, so that the people were weary of its hissing and its splashing, with the slow drip from the eaves. Always the same thick evil cloud flowed from east to west with the rain beneath it. None could see for more than a bowshot from their dwellings for the drifting veil of the rainstorms. Every morning the folk looked upward for a break, but their eyes rested always upon the same endless cloud, until at last they ceased to look up, and their hearts despaired of ever seeing the change. It was raining at Lammastide and raining at the Feast of the Assumption and still raining at Michaelmas. The crops and the hay, sodden and black, had rotted in the fields, for they were not worth the garnering. The sheep had died, and the calves also, so there was little to kill when Martinmas came, and it was time to salt the meat for the winter. They feared a famine, but it was worse than famine which was in store for them. For the rain had ceased at last, and a sickly autumn sun shone upon a land which was soaked and sodden with water. Wet and rotten leaves reeked and festered under the foul haze which rose from the woods. The fields were spotted with monstrous fungi of a size and color never matched before, scarlet and mauve and liver and black. It was as though the sick earth had burst into foul pustules. Mildew and lichen mottled the walls, and with that filthy crop death sprang also from the water-soaked earth. Men died, and women and children, the baron of the castle, the franklin on the farm, the monk in the abbey and the villein in his wattle-end daub cottage. All breathed the same polluted reek, and all died the same death of corruption. Of those who were stricken none recovered, and the illness was ever the same, gross boils, raving, and the black blotches which gave its name to the disease. All through the winter the dead rotted by the wayside for want of some one to bury them. In many a village no single man was left alive. Then at last the spring came with sunshine and health and lightness and laughter, the greenest, sweetest, tenderest spring that England had ever known, but only half of England could know it. The other half had passed away with a great purple cloud. Yet it was there in that stream of death, in that reek of corruption, that the bright and freer England was born. There in that dark hour the first streak of the new dawn was seen. For in no way save by a great upheaval and change could the nation break away from the iron feudal system which held her limbs. But now it was a new country which came out from that year of death. The barons were dead in swaths. No high turret nor cunning moat could keep out that black commoner who struck them down. Oppressive laws slackened for one of those who could enforce them, and once slackened could never be enforced again. The low boor would be a slave no longer. The bondsman snapped his shackles. There was much to do and few left to do it. Therefore the few should be freemen, name their own price, and work where and for whom they would. It was a black death which cleared the way for that great rising 30 years later, which left the English peasant the freest of his class in Europe. But there were few so far-sighted that they could see that here, as ever, good was coming out of evil. At the moment misery and ruin were brought into every family. The dead cattle, the ungarnered crops, the untilled lands, every spring of wealth had dried up at the same moment. Those who were rich became poor. But those who were poor already, and especially those who were poor with a burden of gentility upon their shoulders, found themselves in a perilous state. All through England the smaller gentry were ruined, for they had no trade save war, and they drew their living from the work of others. On many a manor house there came evil times, and on none more than on the manor of Tilford, where for many generations a noble family of the Lorings had held their home. There was a time when the Lorings had held the country from the North Downs to the lakes of Frensham, and when their grim castle keep, rising above the green meadows which border the River Wee, had been the strongest fortalice betwixt Guildford Castle in the east and Winchester in the west. But there came that Barons' War, in which the king used his Saxon subjects as a whip with which to scourge his Norman barons, and Castle Loring, like so many other great strongholds, was swept from the face of the land. From that time the Lorings, with estates sadly curtailed, lived in what had been the Dower House, with enough for splendour. And then came their lawsuit with Waverley Abbey, and the Cistercians laid claim to their richest land, with peccary, turbary, and feudal rights over the remainder. It lingered on for years, this great lawsuit, and when it was finished, the men of the church and the men of the law had divided all that was richest of the estate between them. There was still left the old manor house from which with each generation there came a soldier to uphold the credit of a name and to show the 5 scarlet roses on the silver shield where it had always been shown, in the van. There were 12 bronzes in the little chapel where Matthew the priest said mass every morning, all of men of the house of Loring. 2 lay with their legs crossed, as being from the Crusades. 6 others rested their feet upon lions, as having died in war, for only lay with the effigy of their hounds to show that they had passed in peace. Of this famous but impoverished family, doubly impoverished by law and by pestilence, 2 members were living in the year of grace 1349, Lady Ermyntrude Loring and her grandson Nigel. Lady Ermyntrude's husband had fallen before the Scottish spearsmen at Stirling, and her son Eustace, Nigel's father, had found a glorious death 9 years before this chronicle opens upon the poop of a Norman galley at the sea fight of Sluys. The lonely old woman, fierce and brooding like the falcon mute in a chamber, was soft only toward the lad whom she had brought up. All the tenderness and love of a nature, so hidden from others that they could not imagine their existence, were lavished upon him. She could not bear him away from her, and he, with that respect for authority which the age demanded, would not go without her blessing and consent. So it came about that Nigel, with his lion heart and with the blood of 100 soldiers thrilling in his veins, still at the age of 22, wasted the weary days reclaiming his hawks with leash and lay or training the ellens and spaniels who shared with the family the big earthen-floored hall of the manor house. Day by day the aged Lady Ermyntrude had seen him wax in strength and in manhood, small of stature, it is true, but with muscles of steel and a soul of fire. From all parts, from the warden of Guildford Castle, from the tilt-yard of Farnham, tales of his prowess were brought back to her, of his daring as a rider, of his debonair courage, of his skill with all weapons. But still she, who had both husband and son torn from her by bloody death, could not bear that this, the last of the Lorings, the final bud of so famous an old tree, should share the same fate. With a weary heart, but with a smiling face, he bore his uneventful days, while she would ever put off the evil time until the harvest was better, until the monks of Waverley should give up what they had taken, until his uncle should die and leave money for his outfit, or any other excuse with which he could hold him to her side. And indeed, there was need for a man at Tilford, for the strife betwixt the abbey and the manor house had never been appeased, and still on one pretext or another, the monks would clip off yet one more slice of their neighbour's land. Over the winding river, across the green meadows, rose the short square tower and the high grey walls of the grim abbey, with its bell tolling by day and night, a voice of menace and of dread to the little household. It is in the heart of the great Cistercian monastery that this chronicle of old days must take its start, as we trace the feud betwixt the monks and the house of Loring, with those events to which it gave birth, ending with the coming of Chandos, the strange spear-running of Tilford Bridge, and the deeds with which Nigel won fame in the wars. Elsewhere, in the Chronicle of the White Company, it has been set forth what manner of man was Nigel Loring. Those who love him may read herein those things which went to his making. Let us go back together and gaze upon this green stage of England, the scenery, hill, plain, and river even as now, the actors in much our very selves, in much also so change in thought and act that there might be dwellers in another world to ours. Chapter 2. How the Devil Came to Waverley. The day was the 1st of May, which was the festival of the blessed apostles Philip and James. The year was the 1349 from man's salvation. from tis to sext, and then again from sext to nones. Abbot John of the House of Waverley had been seated in his study while he conducted the many high duties of his office. All around, for many a mile on every side, stretched the fertile and flourishing estate of which he was the master. In the centre lay the broad abbey buildings, with church and cloisters, hospitium, chapter house and frere house, all buzzing with a busy life. Through the open window came the low hum of the voices of the brethren as they walked in pious converse in the ambulatory below. From across the cloister there rolled the distant rise and fall of a Gregorian chant, where the precentor was hard at work upon the choir, while down in the chapter house sounded the strident voice of Brother Peter, expounding the rule of St. Bernard to the novices. Abbot John rose to stretch his cramped limbs. He looked out at the green sward of the cloister, and at the graceful line of open Gothic arches which skirted a covered walk for the brethren within. Two and two, in their black and white garb with slow step, and heads inclined, they paced round and round. Several of the more studious had brought their illuminating work from the scriptorium, and sat in the warm sunshine with their little platters of pigments and packets of gold leaf before them, their shoulders rounded and their faces sunk low over the white sheets of vellum. There, too, was the copper worker with his baron and graver. Learning and art were not traditions with the Cistercians as with the parent order of the Benedictines, and yet the library of Waverley was well filled both with precious books and with pious students. Questions of doctrine, questions of building, points of forestry, of agriculture, of drainage, of feudal law, all came to the abbot for settlement. He held the scales of justice in all the abbey banlieue, which stretched over many a mile of Hampshire and of Surrey. To the monks his displeasure might mean fasting, exile to some sterner community, or even imprisonment in chains. Over the layman also he could hold any punishment save only corporeal death, instead of which he had in hand a far more dreadful weapon of spiritual excommunication. Such were the powers of the abbot, and it is no wonder that there were masterful lines in the ruddy features of Abbot John, or that the brethren, glancing up, should put on an even meeker carriage and more demure expression as they saw the watchful face in the window above them. A knock at the door of his studio recalled the abbot to his immediate duties, and he returned to his desk. A huge book of accounts was tucked under one of his arms, while a great bunch of keys hung from the other hand, a badge at his office, and also on occasion of impatience a weapon of offense, as many a scarred head among rustics and lay brothers could testify. The abbot sighed wearily, for he suffered much at the hands of his strenuous agent. "Well, Brother Samuel, what is your will?" he asked. "Holy Father, I have to report that I have sold the wool to Master Baldwin of Winchester at 2 shillings a bale more than it fetched last year, for the murrain among the sheep has raised the price." "You have done well, brother. I have also to tell you that I have distrained what the warrener from his cottage, for his Christmas rent is still unpaid, nor the hen rents of last year." "It is true, Holy Father, but if I should pass him, then how am I to ask the rent of the foresters of Puttenham, or the hinds in the village? Such a thing spreads from house to house, and where then is the wealth of Waverley? What else, Brother Samuel? There is the matter of the fish ponds. How have the char prospered, brother?" "They have done well, Holy Father, but the carp have died in the abbot's pond." "Carp prosper only upon a gravel bottom. They must be put in also in their due proportion, 3 milters to 1 spawner, brother sacrist, and the spot must be free from wind, stony and sandy, an ell deep, with willows and grass upon the banks. Mud for tench, brother, gravel for carp." The sacrist leaned forward with the face of one who bears tidings of woe. "There are pike in the abbot's pond," said he. "Pike!" cried the abbot in horror. "As well shut up a wolf in our sheepfold. How came a pike in the pond?" "There were no pike last year, and a pike does not fall with the rain nor rise in the springs. The pond must be drained, or we shall spend next Lent upon stockfish, and have the brethren down with a great sickness ere Easter Sunday has come to absolve us from our abstinence." "The pond shall be drained, Holy Father. I have already ordered it. Then we shall plant pot herbs on the mud bottom, and after we have gathered them in, return the fish and water once more from the lower pond, so that it may fatten among the rich stubble." A spasm of anger passed over the fierce face of the sacrist, and his keys rattled as his bony hand clasped them more tightly. "Young Nigel Loring," said he swore that he would do us scathe, and in this way he has done it. How know you this? 6 weeks ago he was seen day by day fishing for pike at the great lake of Frensham. Twice at night he has been met with a bundle of straw under his arm on the hank lay down. Well, I wot that the straw was wet, and that a live pike lay within it. Because he hates the house of Waverley, Holy Father, because he swears that we hold his father's land, in which there is surely some truth. But, Holy Father, we hold no more than the law has allowed. True, brother, and yet between ourselves, we may admit that the heavier purse may weigh down the scales of justice. When I have passed the old house and have seen the aged woman with her ruddled cheeks and her baleful eyes look the curses she dare not speak, I have many a time wished that we had other neighbors, that we can soon bring about, Holy Father. Indeed, it is of it that I wish to speak to you. Surely it is not hard for us to drive them from the countryside. There are 30 years' claims of escuage unsettled, and there is Sergeant Wilkins, the lawyer of Guildford, whom I will warrant to draw up such arrears of dues and rents and issues of hidage and fodder corn that these folk, who are as beggarly as they are proud, will have to sell the roof tree over them ere they can meet them. Within 3 days I will have them at our mercy. They are an ancient family and of good repute. I would not treat them too harshly. Brother, bethink you of the pike in the carp pond. The abbot hardened his heart at the thought. It was indeed a devil's deed, when we had but newly stocked it with char and with carp. Well, the law is the law, and if you can use it to hurt, it is still lawful to do so. Have these claims been advanced? Deacon the bailiff with his 2 varlets went down to the hole yesternight on the matter of the escuage, and came screaming back with his young hothead raging at their heels. He is small and slight, yet he has the strength of many men in the hour of his wrath. The bailiff swears that he will go no more, save with 50 score of archers to uphold him. The abbot was red with anger at this new offense. I will teach him that the servants of Holy Church, even though we of the rule of St. Bernard be the lowliest and humblest of the children, can still defend their own against the froward and the violent. Go, cite this man before the abbey court. Let him appear in the chapter house after 'tis tomorrow. But the wary sacristan shook his head. Nay, Holy Father, the times are not yet ripe. Give me 3 days, I pray you, that my case against him may be complete. Bear in mind that the father and the grandfather of this unruly squire were both famous men of their day and the foremost knights in the king's own service, living in high honour and dying in their knightly duty. The Lady Ermintrude Loring was first lady to the king's mother. Roger Fitzellen of Farnham and Sir Hugh Walcott of Guildford Castle were each old comrades-in-arms of Nigel's father, and sipped to him on the distaff side. Already there has been talk that we have dealt harshly with them. Therefore, my rede is it would be wise and wary and wait until his cup be indeed full. The abbot had opened his mouth to reply, when the consultation was interrupted by a most unwonted buzz of excitement from among the monks in the cloister below. Questions and answers in excited voices sounded from one side of the ambulatory to the other. Sacristan and abbot were gazing at each other in amazement at such a breach of the discipline and decorum of their well-trained flock, when there came a swift step upon the stay, and a white-faced brother flung open the door and rushed into the room. "Father Abbot," he cried, "alas, alas, Brother John is dead, and the holy subprior is dead, and the devil is loose in the 5-virgate field." Chapter 3. The Yellow Horse of Crooksbury. In those simple times there was a great wonder and mystery in life. Man walked in fear and solemnity, with heaven very close above his head, and hell below his very feet. God's visible hand was everywhere, in the rainbow and the comet, in the thunder and the wind. The devil, too, raged openly upon the earth. He skulked behind the hedgerows in the gloaming. He laughed loudly in the night-time. He clawed the dying sinner, pounced on the unbaptized babe, and twisted the limbs of the epileptic. A foul fiend slunk ever by a man's side and whispered villainies in his ear, while above him there hovered an angel of grace who pointed to the steep and narrow track. How could one doubt these things, when Pope and priest and skull and king were all united in believing them, with no single voice of question in the whole wide world? Every book read, every picture seen, every tale heard from nurse or mother, all taught the same lesson. And as a man traveled through the world, his faith would grow the firmer. For go where he would, there were the endless shrines of the saints, each with its holy relic in the center, and around the tradition of incessant miracles, with stacks of deserted crutches and silver votive hearts to prove them. At every turn he was made to feel how thin was the veil, and how easily rent, which screened him from the awful denizens of the unseen world. Hence the wild announcement of the frightened monk seemed terrible, rather than incredible to those whom he addressed. The abbot's ruddy face paled for a moment, it is true, but he plucked the crucifix from his desk and rose valiantly to his feet. "Lead me to him," said he. "Show me the foul fiend who dares to lay his grip upon brethren of the holy house of St. Bernard. Run down to my chaplain, brother, bid him bring the exorcist with him, and also the blessed box of relics, and the bones of St. James from under the altar. With these and a contrite and humble heart we may show front to all the powers of darkness." But the sacrist was of a more critical turn of mind. He clutched the monk's arm with a grip which left its 5 purple spots for many a day to come. "Is this the way to enter the abbot's own chamber, without knock or reverence, or so much as a pax vobiscum?" said he sternly. "You were wont to be our gentlest novice, of lowly carriage in chapter, devout in psalmody and strict in the cloister. Pull your wits together and answer me straightly. In what form has the foul fiend appeared, and how has he done this grievous scathe to our brethren? Have you seen him with your own eyes, or do you repeat from hearsay? Speak, man, or you stand on the penance stool in the chapter house this very hour." Thus adjured, the frightened monk grew calmer in his bearing, though his white lips and his startled eyes, with the gasping of his breath, told of his inward tremors. Amazed at such a sight, I stood without movement and had said a credo and 3 aves, when the devil dropped the sub-prior and sprang upon me. With the help of St. Bernard I clambered over the wall, but not before his teeth had found my leg, and he had torn away the whole back skirt of my gown. As he spoke, he turned and gave corroboration to his story by the hanging ruins of his long trailing garment. "In what shape then did Satan appear?" the abbot demanded. "As a great yellow horse, Holy Father, a monster horse, with eyes of fire and the teeth of a griffin. I took him in discharge of the debt, and I ordered the varlets who had halted him to leave him alone in the water meadow, for I have heard that the beast is indeed a most evil spirit, and has killed more men than one. It was an ill day for Waverley that you brought such a monster within its bounds," said the abbot. "If the sub-prior and brother John be indeed dead, then it would seem that if the horse be not the devil, he is at least the devil's instrument. Also devil, Holy Father, I heard him shout with joy as he trampled upon brother John, and had you seen him tossing the sub-prior as a dog shakes a rat, you would perchance have felt even as I did." "Come then," cried the abbot, "let us see with our own eyes what evil has been done." And the 3 monks hurried down the stair which led to the cloisters. They had no sooner descended than their more pressing fears were set at rest, for at that very moment, limping, disheveled and mud-stained, the 2 sufferers were being led in amid a crowd of sympathizing brethren. Shouts and cries from outside showed, however, that some further drama was in progress, and both abbot and sacrist hastened onward as fast as the dignity of their office would permit, until they had passed the gates and gained the wall of the meadow. Looking over it, a remarkable sight presented itself to their eyes. Scattered round in a respectful circle, 6 of the abbey lay servants and foresters, each holding a halter, were creeping toward him. Every now and then, with a beautiful toss and swerve and plunge, the great creature would turn upon one of his would-be captors, and with outstretched head, flying menais, and flashing teeth, would chase him screaming to the safety of the wall, while the others would close swiftly in behind and cast their ropes in the hope of catching neck or leg, but only in their turn to be chased to the nearest refuge. Had 2 of these ropes settled upon the horse, and had their throwers found some purchase of stump or boulder by which they could hold them, then the man's brain might have won its wonted victory over swiftness and strength. But the brains were themselves at fault which imagined that one such rope would serve any purpose save to endanger the thrower. Yet so it was, and what might have been foreseen occurred at the very moment of the arrival of the monks. The horse, having chased one of his enemies to the wall, remained so long snorting his contempt over the coping that the others were able to creep upon him from behind. Several ropes were flung, and one noose settled over the proud crest and lost itself in the waving menai. In an instant the creature had turned and the men were flying for their lives. But he who had cast the rope lingered, uncertain what use to make of his own success. That moment of doubt was fatal. With a yell of dismay, the man saw the great creature rear above him. Then with a crash the 4 feet fell upon him and dashed him to the ground. He rose screaming, was hurled over once more, and lay a quivering, bleeding heap, while the savage horse, the most cruel and terrible in its anger of all creatures on earth, bit and shook and trampled the writhing body. A loud wail of horror rose from the lines of tonsured heads which skirted the high wall, a wail which suddenly died away into a long hushed silence, broken at last by a rapturous cry of thanksgiving and of joy. On the road which led to the old dark manor house upon the side of the hill a youth had been riding. His mount was a sorry one, a weedy, shambling, long-haired colt, and his patched tunic of faded purple with stained leather belt presented no very smart appearance. Yet in the bearing of the man, in the poise of his head, in his easy, graceful carriage, and in the bold glance of his large blue eyes, there was that stamp of distinction and of breed which would have given him a place of his own in any assembly. He was of small stature, but his frame was singularly elegant and graceful. His face, though tanned with the weather, was delicate in features and most eager and alert in expression. A thick fringe of crisp yellow curls broke from under the dark flat cap which he was wearing, and a short golden beard hid the outline of his strong square chin. One white osprey feather thrust through a gold brooch in the front of his cap gave a touch of grace to his sombre garb. This and other points of his attire, the short hanging mantle, the leather-sheathed hunting knife, the cross-belt which sustained a brazen horn, the soft doeskin boots and the prick spurs, would all disclose themselves to an observer. But at the first glance the brown face set in gold and the dancing light of the quick, reckless, laughing eyes were the one strong memory left behind. Such was the youth who, cracking his whip joyously, and followed by half a score of dogs, cantered on his rude pony down the Tilford lane. And thence it was that with a smile of amused contempt upon his face he observed the comedy in the field and the impotent efforts of the servants of Waverley. Suddenly, however, as the comedy turned swiftly to black tragedy, this passive spectator leaped into quick, strenuous life. With a spring he was off his pony, and with another he was over the stone wall and flying swiftly across the field. Looking up from his victim, the great yellow horse saw this other enemy approach, and spurning the prostrate, but still writhing body with its heels, dashed at the newcomer. But this time there was no hasty flight, no rapturous pursuit to the wall. The little man braced himself straight, flung up his metal-headed whip, and met the horse with a crashing blow upon the head, repeated again and again with every attack. In vain the horse reared and tried to overthrow its enemy with swooping shoulders and pawing hoofs. Cool, swift and alert, the man sprang swiftly aside from under the very shadow of death, and then again came the swish and thud of the unerring blow from the heavy handle. The horse drew off, glared with wonder and fury at this masterful man, and then trotted round in a circle, with mane bristling, tail streaming, and ears on end, snorting in its rage and pain. The man, hardly deigning to glance at his fell neighbor, passed on to the wounded forester, raised him in his arms with a strength which could not have been expected in so slight a body, and carried him, groaning, to the wall, where a dozen hands were outstretched to help him over. Then, at his leisure, the young man also climbed the wall, smiling back with cool contempt at the yellow horse, which had come raging after him once more. As he sprang down, a dozen monks surrounded him to thank him or to praise him, but he would have turned sullenly away without a word had he not been stopped by Abbot John in person. "Nay, Squire Loring," said he, "if you be a bad friend to our abbey, yet we must needs own that you have played the part of a good Christian this day, for if there is breath left in our servant's body, it is to you next to our blessed patron St. Bernard that we owe it." The abbot flushed at the bold words, and bit his lip with vexation. It was the sacrist, however, who answered. "It would be more fitting and more gracious," said he, "if you were to speak to the Holy Father Abbot in a manner suited to his high rank and to the respect which is due to a prince of the church." The youth turned his bold blue eyes upon the monk, and his sunburned face darkened with anger. "Were it not for the gown upon your back, and for your silvering hay, I would answer you in another fashion," said he. "You are the lean wolf which growls ever at our door, greedy for the little which had been left to us. Say and do what you will with me, but by St. Paul, if I find that Dame Ermintrude is baited by your ravenous pack, I will beat them off with this whip from the little patch which still remains of all the acres of my fathers. Have a K, Nigel Loring, have a K, cried the abbot with finger upraised. Have you no fears of the law of England? A just law I fear and obey. Have you no respect for Holy Church? Rash man, many a one has been blighted by a ban for less than you have now said. And yet it is not for us to judge you harshly this day. You are young, and hot words come easily to your lips. How fares the forester? His hurt is grievous, Father Abbot, but he will live, said a brother, looking up from prostrate form. With a bloodletting and an electuary, I will warrant him sound within a month. Then bear him to the hospital. And now, brother, about this terrible beast who still gazes and snorts at us over the top of the wall, as though his thoughts of Holy Church were as uncouth as those of Squire Nigel himself. What are we to do with him? Here is Franklin Aylward, said one of the brethren. The horse was his, and doubtless he will take it back to his farm. But the stout, red-faced farmer shook his head at the proposal. Not I, in faith, said he. The beast hath chased me twice round the paddock. It has nigh slain my boy Samkin. He would never be happy till he had ridden it, nor has he ever been happy since. There is not a hind in my employ who will enter his stall. Ill fare the day that ever I took the beast from the castle stud at Guildford, where they could do nothing with it, and no rider could be found bold enough to mount it. When the sacrist here took it for a 50-shilling debt, he made his own bargain and must abide by it. He comes no more to the Crooksbury farm. And he stays no more here, said the abbot. Brother sacrist, you have raised the devil, and it is for you to lay it again. That I will most readily, cried the sacrist. The pittance master can stop the 50-shilling from my very own weekly dole, and so the abbey be none the poorer. In the meantime here is what with his arbalist and a bolt in his girdle. Let him drive it to the head through this cursed creature, for his hide and his hoofs are of more value than his wicked self. A hard brown old woodman who had been shooting vermin in the abbey groves stepped forward with a grin of pleasure. After a lifetime of stoats and foxes, this was indeed a noble quarry which was to fall before him. Fitting a bolt in the nut of his taut crossbow, he had raised it to his shoulder and leveled it at the face, proud, disheveled head which tossed in savage freedom at the other side of the wall. His finger was crooked on the spring, when a blow from a whip struck the bow upward, and the bolt flew harmless over the abbey orchard, while the woodman shrank abashed from Nigel Loring's angry eyes. Keep your bolts for your weasels, said he. Would you take life from a creature whose only fault is that its spirit is so high that it has met none yet who dare control it? You would slay such a horse as a king might be proud to mount, and all because a country franklin, or a monk, or a monk's valet, has not the wit nor the hands to master him. The sacrist turned swiftly on the squire. The abbey owes you an offering for this day's work, however rude your words may be, said he. If you think so much of the horse, you may desire to own it. If I am to pay for it, then with the holy abbot's permission, it is in my gift, and I bestow it freely upon you. His pride is as stubborn as a horse's, holy father, the sacrist answered, his gaunt fact breaking into a malicious smile. Man or beast, one will break the other, and the world will be the better for it, if you forbid me. Nay, brother, you have bought the horse, and you may have the bestowal of it. Then I give it, hide and hoofs, tail and temper, to Nigel Loring, and may it be as sweet and as gentle to him as he had been to the abbot of Waverley. The sacrist spoke aloud amid the tittering of the monks, for the man concerned was out of earshot. At the first words which had shown him the turn which affairs had taken, he had run swiftly to the spot where he had left his pony. From its mouth he removed the bit and the stout bridle which held it. Then, leaving the creature to nibble the grass by the wayside, he sped back whence he came. I take your gift, monk, said he, though I know well why it is that you give it. Yet I thank you, for there are two things upon earth for which I have ever yearned, and which my thin purse could never buy. The one is a noble horse, such a horse as my father's son should have betwixt his thighs, and here is the one of all others which I would have chosen, since some small deed is to be done in the winning of him, and some honorable advancement to be gained. How is the horse called? Its name, said the franklin, is Pomace. I warn you, young sir, that none may ride him, for many have tried, and the luckiest is he who has only a staved rib to show for it." "I thank you for your rede," said Nigel, "and now I see that this is indeed a horse which I would journey far to meet. I am your man, Pommers, and you are my horse, and this night you shall own it, or I will never need horse again. My spirit against thine, and God hold thy spirit high, Pommers, so that the greater be the adventure, and the more hope of honour gained." While he spoke, the young squire had climbed onto the top of the wall and stood there balanced, the very image of grace and spirit and gallantry, his bridle hanging from one hand and his whip grasped in the other. With a fierce snort, the horse made for him instantly, and his white teeth flashed as he snapped. But again a heavy blow from the loaded whip caused him to swerve, and even at the instant of the swerve, measuring the distance with steady eyes, and bending his supple body for the spring, Nigel bounded into the air and fell with his legs astride the broad back of the yellow horse. For a minute, with neither saddle nor stirrups to help him, and the beast ramping and rearing like a mad thing beneath him, he was hard-pressed to hold his own. His legs were like two bands of steel welded onto the swelling arches of the great horse's ribs, and his left hand was buried deep in the tawny menere. Never had the dull round of the lives of the gentle brethren of Waverley been broken by so fiery a scene. Springing to right and swooping to left, now with its tangled wicked head betwixt its forefeet, and now poising 8 feet high in the air, with scarlet, furious nostrils and maddened eyes, the yellow horse was a thing of terror and a beauty. But the lithe figure on his back, bending like a reed in the wind at every movement, firm below, pliant above, with calm inexorable face, and eyes which danced and gleamed with the joy of contest, still held its masterful place for all that the fiery heart and the iron muscles of the great beast could do. Once a long drone of dismay rose from the monks, as rearing higher and higher, yet a last mad effort sent the creature toppling over backward upon its rider. But, swift and cool, he had writhed from under it ere it fell, spurned it with his foot as it rolled upon the earth, and then seizing its menere as it rose, swung himself lightly onto its back once more. Even the grim sacrist could not but join the cheer, as Pommers, amazed to find the rider still upon his back, plunged and curvetted down the field. He would break in red ruin at the base of it if he could but dash forever the life of this man, who claimed mastery over that which had never found its master yet. The great haunches gathered under it. The eager hoofs drummed the grass. As fast and still more fast the frantic horse bore himself and his rider toward the wall. Would Nigel spring off? To do so would be to bend his will to that of the beast beneath him. There was a better way than that. Cool, quick, and decided, the man swiftly passed both whip and bridle into the left hand which still held the menere. Then with the right he slipped his short mantle from his shoulders, and lying forward along the creature's strenuous, rippling back he cast a flapping cloth over the horse's eyes. The result was but too successful, for it nearly brought about the downfall of the rider. When those red eyes straining for death were suddenly shrouded in unexpected darkness, the amazed horse propped on its forefeet and came to so dead a stop that Nigel was shot forward onto its neck and hardly held himself by his hand-twined hand. Ere he had slid back into position, the moment of danger had passed. For the horse, its purpose all blurred in its mind by the strange thing which had befallen, wheeled round once more, trembling in every fibre, and tossing its petulant head until at last the mantle had been slipped from its eyes and the chilling darkness had melted into the homely circle of sunlit grass once more. But what was this new outrage which had been inflicted upon it? What was this defiling bar of iron which was locked hard against its mouth? What were these straps which galled the tossing neck, this band which spanned its chest? In those instants of stillness ere the mantle had been plucked away, Nigel had lain forward, had slipped the snaffle between the champing teeth, and had deftly secured it. Blind, frantic fury surged in the yellow horse's heart once more at this new degradation, this badge of serfdom and infamy. His spirit rose high and menacing at the touch. He loathed this place, these people, all and everything which threatened his freedom. He would have done with them forever. He would see them no more. Led him away to the uttermost parts of the earth, to the great plains where freedom is. Anywhere over the far horizon where he could get away from a defiling bit and the insufferable mastery of man. He turned with a rush, and one magnificent deer-like bound carried him over the 4-foot gate. Nigel's hat had flown off, and his yellow curls streamed behind him as he rose and fell in the leap. They were in the water meadow now, and the rippling stream 20 feet wide gleamed in front of them, running down to the main current of the Wee. The yellow horse gathered his haunches under him and flew over like an arrow. He took off from behind a boulder and cleared a furze bush on the farther side. 2 stones still marked the leap from hoof mark to hoof mark, and they are 11 good paces apart. Under the hanging branch of the great oak tree on the farther side, that Quercus tilfordiensis audiensis is still shown as the bound of the abbey's immediate precincts. The great horse passed. He had hoped to sweep off his rider, but Nigel sank low on the heaving back with his face buried in the flying menere. The rough bough rasped him rudely, but never shook his spirit nor his grip. Rearing, plunging, and struggling, Pommers broke through the sapling grove and was out on the broad stretch of Hankley Down. And now came such a ride as still lingers in the gossip of the lowly country folk, and forms the rude jingle of that old Surrey ballad, now nearly forgotten, save for the refrain. The doe that sped on hind head, the kestrel on the wind, and Nigel on the yellow horse can leave the world behind. Before them lay a rolling ocean of dark heather, knee-deep, swelling in billow on billow up to the clear-cut hill before them. Above stretched one unbroken arch of peaceful blue, with a sun which was sinking down toward the Hampshire hills. Through the deep heather, down the gullies, over the watercourses, up the broken slopes, Pommers flew, his great heart bursting with rage, and every fibre quivering at the indignities which he had endured. And still, do what he would, the man clung fast to his heaving sides and to his flying menere, silent, motionless, inexorable, letting him do what he would, but fix his fate upon his purpose. Over Hankley Down, through Thursday Marsh, with the reeds up to his mud-splashed withers, onward up the long slope of the headland of the Hinds, down by the Nutcombe Gorge, slipping, blundering, bounding, but never slackening his fearful speed, on went the great yellow horse. The villagers of Shottermill heard the wild clatter of hoofs, but ere they could swing the ox-hide curtains of their cottage doors, horse and rider were lost amid the high bracken of the Hazelman Valley. On he went, and on, tossing the miles behind his flying hoofs. No marshland could clog him, no hill could hold him back. Up the slope of Lynchmere and the long ascent of Fernhurst he thundered as on the level, and it was not until he had flown down the incline of Henley Hill, and the grey castle tower of Midhurst rose over the coppice in front, that at last the eager outstretched neck sank a little on the breast, and the breath came quick and fast. Look where he would in woodland and on down, his straining eyes could catch no sign of those plains of freedom which he sought. And yet another outrage. It was bad that this creature should still cling so tight upon his back, but now he would even go to the intolerable length of checking him and guiding him on the way that he would have him go. There was a sharp pluck at his mouth, and his head was turned north once more. As well go that way as another, but the man was mad indeed if he thought that such a horse as Pommers was at the end of his spirit or his strength. He would soon show him that he was unconquered, if it strained his sinews or broke his heart to do so. Back then he flew up the long, long ascent. Would he ever get to the end of it? Yet he would not own that he could go no farther while the man still kept his grip. He was white with foam and caked with mud. His eyes were gorged with blood, his mouth open and gasping, his nostrils expanded, his coat stark and reeking. On he flew down the long Sunday hill until he reached the deep Kingsley Marsh at the bottom. No, it was too much. Flesh and blood could go no farther. As he struggled out from the reedy slime with the heavy black mud still clinging to his fetlocks, he at last eased down with sobbing breath and slowed the tumultuous gallop to a canter. Oh, crowning infamy! Was there no limit to these degradations? He was no longer even to choose his own pace. Since he had chosen to gallop so far at his own, well, he must now gallop farther still, at the will of another. A spur struck home on either flank. A stinging whiplash fell across his shoulder. He bounded his own height in the air at the pain and the shame of it. Then, forgetting his weary limbs, forgetting his panting, reeking sides, forgetting everything save his intolerable insult and the burning spirit within, he plunged off once more upon his furious gallop. He was out on the heather slopes again and heading for Way Down Common. On he flew and on. But again his brain failed him, and again his limbs trembled beneath him. And yet again he strove to ease his pace, only to be driven onward by the cruel spur and the falling lash. He was blind and giddy with fatigue. He saw no longer where he placed his feet. He cared no longer whither he went. But his one mad longing was to get away from this dreadful thing, this torture which clung to him and would not let him go. Through Thursley village he passed, his eyes straining in his agony, his heart bursting within him, and he had won his way to the crest of Thursley Down, still stung forward by stab and blow, when his spirit weakened, his giant strength ebbed out of him, and with one deep sob of agony the yellow horse sank among the heather. So sudden was the fall that Nigel flew forward over his shoulder, and beast and man lay prostrate and gasping while the last red rim of the sun sank behind Butser, and the first stars gleamed in a violet sky. The young squire was the first to recover, and kneeling by the panting, overawed horse, he passed his hand gently over the tangled mane and down the foam-flecked face. The red eye rolled up at him, but it was wonder, not hatred, a prayer and not a threat, which he could read in it. As he stroked the reeking muzzle, the horse whinnied gently and thrust his nose into the hollow of his hand. It was enough. It was the end of the contest, the acceptance of new conditions by a chivalrous foe from a chivalrous victor. "You are my horse, Pommers," Nigel whispered, and he laid his cheek against the craning head. "I know you, Pommers, and you know me, and with the help of St. Paul we shall teach some other folk to know us both. Now let us walk together as far as this moorland pond, for indeed I wot not whether it is you or I who need the water most." And so it was that some belated monks of Waverley, passing homeward from the outer farm, saw a strange sight which they carried on with them, so that it reached that very night the ears both of sacrist and of abbot. For, as they passed through Tilford, they had seen horse and man walking side by side and head by head up the manor house lane. And when they had raised their lanterns on the pair, it was none other than the young squire himself who was leading home, as a shepherd leads a lamb, the fearsome yellow horse of Crooksbury. Chapter 4. How the Summoner Came to the Manor House of Tilford. How the Summoner Came to the Manor House of Tilford. The earlier castles had a set purpose, for they were built that the invaders might hold down the country. But when the conquest was once firmly established, a castle had lost its meaning save as a refuge from justice or as a centre for civil strife. On the marches of Wales and of Scotland, the castle might continue to be a bulwark to the kingdom, and there still grew and flourished. But in all other places they were rather a menace to the king's majesty, and as such were discouraged and destroyed. By the reign of the third Edward, the greater part of the old fighting castles had been converted into dwelling houses or had been ruined in the civil wars, and left where their grim grey bones are still littered upon the brows of our hills. The new buildings were either great country houses, capable of defence, but mainly residential, or they were manor houses with no military significance at all. Such was the Tilford Manor House, where the last survivors of the old and magnificent house of Loring still struggled hard to keep a footing, and to hold off the monks and the lawyers from the few acres which were left to them. The mansion was a two-storied one, framed in heavy beams of wood, the interstices filled with rude blocks of stone. An outside staircase led up to several sleeping rooms above. Below there were only two apartments, the smaller of which was a bower of the aged Lady Ermintrude. The other was the hall, a very large room, which served as the living room of the family and as the common dining room of themselves and of their little group of servants and retainers. The dwellings of these servants, the kitchens, the offices, and the stables were all represented by a row of penthouses and sheds behind the main building. Here lived Charles the Page, Peter the Old Falconer, Red Swire, who had followed Nigel's grandfather to the Scottish wars, Weathercoat the Broken Minstrel, John the Cook, and other survivors of more prosperous days, who still clung to the old house as the barnacles of some wrecked and stranded vessel. One evening, about a week after the breaking of the Yellow Horse, Nigel and his grandmother sat on either side of the large empty fireplace in the spacious apartment. The supper had been removed, and so had the trestle tables upon which it had been served, so that the room seemed bare and empty. The stone floor was strewed with a thick layer of green rushes, which was swept out every Saturday and carried with it all the dirt and debris of the week. Several dogs were now crouched among these rushes, gnawing and cracking the bones which had been thrown from the table. A long wooden buffet loaded with plates and dishes filled one end of the room, but there was little other furniture save some benches against the walls, two Dorset chairs, one small table littered with chessmen, and a great iron coffer. In one corner was a high wickerwork stand, and on it two stately falcons were perched, silent and motionless, save for an occasional twinkle of their fierce yellow eyes. But if the actual fittings of the room would have appeared scanty to one who had lived in a more luxurious age, he would have been surprised on looking up to see the multitude of objects which were suspended above his head. Over the fireplace were the coats of arms of a number of houses allied by blood or by marriage to the Lorings. The two crescent lights which flared upon each side gleamed upon the blue line of the Percys, the red birds of de Valence, the black and grail cross of de Mohun, the silver star de Vere, and the ruddy bars of Fitzalan, all grouped round the famous red roses on the silver shield which the Lorings had borne to glory upon many a bloody field. Then from side to side the room was spanned by heavy oaken beams from which a great number of objects were hanging. There were mail shirts of obsolete pattern, several shields, one or two rusted and battered helmets, bowstaves, lances, otter spears, harness, fishing rods, and other implements of war or the chase, while higher still amid the black shadows of the peaked roof could be seen rows of hams, flitches of bacon, salted geese, and those other forms of preserved meat which played so great a part in the housekeeping of the Middle Ages. Dame Ermyntrude Loring, daughter, wife, and mother of warriors, was herself a formidable figure, tall and gaunt, with hard craggy features and intolerant dark eyes. Even her snow-white hair and stooping back could not entirely remove the sense of fear which she inspired in those around her. Her thoughts and memories went back to harsher times, and she looked upon the England around her as a degenerate and effeminate land which had fallen away from the old standard of knightly courtesy and valor. The rising power of the people, the growing wealth of the church, the increasing luxury in life and manners, and the gentler tone of the age were all equally abhorrent to her, so that the dread of her fierce face, and even of the heavy oak staff with which she supported her failing limbs, was widespread through all the country round. Yet if she was feared, she was also respected. For in days when books were few and readers scarce, a long memory and a ready tongue were of the more value, and where, save from Dame Ermyntrude, could the young unlettered squires of Surrey and Hampshire hear of their grandfathers and their battles, or learn that lore of heraldry and chivalry which he handed down from a ruder but more martial age. Poor as she was, there was no one in Surrey whose guidance would be more readily sought upon a question of precedence or of conduct than the Dame Ermyntrude Loring. She sat now with bowed back by the empty fireplace, and looked across at Nigel with all the harsh lines of her old ruddled face softening into love and pride. The young squire was busy cutting bird bolts for his crossbow, and whistling softly as he worked. Suddenly he looked up, and caught the dark eyes which were fixed upon him. He leaned forward and patted the bony hand. "What hath pleased you, dear dame? I read pleasure in your eyes. I have heard today, Nigel, how you came to win that great war horse which stamps in our stable. Nay, dame, I had told you that the monks had given it to me. You said so, fair son, but never a word more. Yet the horse which you brought home was a very different horse, I wot, to that which was given you. Why did you not tell me? I should think it shame to talk of such a thing. So would your father before you, and his father no less. They would sit silent among the knights when the wine went round and listened to every man's deeds. But if perchance there was anyone who spoke louder than the rest, and seemed to be eager for honor, then afterwards your father would pluck him softly by the sleeve and whisper in his ear to learn if there was any small vow of which he could relieve him, or if he would deign to perform some noble deed of arms upon his person. And if the man were a braggart and would go no further, your father would be silent and none would know it. But if he bore himself well, your father would spread his fame far and wide, but never make mention of himself." Nigel looked at the old woman with shining eyes. "I love to hear you speak of him," said he. "I pray you to tell me once more the manner of his death." "He died as he had lived, a very courtly gentleman. It was at the great sea battle upon the Norman coast, and your father was in command of the afterguard in the king's own ship. Now the French had taken a great English ship the year before when they came over, and held the narrow seas, and burned the town of Southampton. This ship was the Christopher, and they placed it in the front of their battle. But the English closed upon it and stormed over its side, and slew all who were upon it. But your father and Sir Loring of Genoa, who commanded the Christopher, fought upon the high poop, so that all the fleet stopped to watch it. And the king himself cried aloud at the sight. For Sir Loring was a famous man-at-arms and bore himself very stoutly that day, and many a knight envied your father that he should have chanced upon so excellent a person. But your father bore him back and struck him such a blow with a mace that he turned the helmet half round on his head, so that he could no longer see through the eye holes. And Sir Loring threw down his sword and gave himself to ransom. But your father took him by the helmet and twisted it until he had it straight upon his head. Then, when he could see once again, he handed him his sword and prayed him that he would rest himself and then continue, for it was great profit and joy to see any gentleman carry himself so well. So they sat together and rested by the rail of the poop. But even as they raised their hands again, your father was struck by a stone from a mangonel and so died. And this Loring, cried Nigel, he died also, as I understand. I fear that he was slain by the archers, for they loved your father, and they do not see these things with our eyes. It was a pity, said Nigel, for it is clear that he was a good knight and bore himself very bravely. Time was, when I was young, when commoners dared not have laid their grimy hands upon such a man. Men of gentle blood and coat armor made war upon each other, and the others, spearmen or archers, could scramble amongst themselves. But now all are of a level, and only here and there one like yourself, fair son, who reminds me of the men who are gone. Nigel leaned forward and took her hands in his. What I am you have made me, said he. It is true, Nigel. I have indeed watched over you as a gardener watches his most precious blossom, for in you alone are all the hopes of our ancient house, and soon, very soon, you will be alone. Nay, dear lady, say not that. I am very old, Nigel, and I feel the shadow closing in upon me. My heart yearns to go, for all whom I have known and loved have gone before me. And you. It will be a blessed day for you, since I have held you back from that world into which your brave spirit longs to plunge. Nay, nay, I have been happy here with you at Tilford. We are very poor, Nigel. I do not know where we may find the money to fit you for the wars. Yet we have good friends. There is Sir John Chandos, who has won such credit in the French wars and who rides ever by the king's bridle arm. He was your father's friend, and they were squires together. If I sent you to court with a message to him, he would do what he could. Nigel's fair face flushed. Nay, Dame Ermintrude, I must find my own gear, even as I have found my own horse, for I had rather ride into battle in this tunic than owe my suit to another. I feared that you would say so, Nigel, but indeed I know not how else we may get the money, said the old woman sadly. It was different in the days of my father. I can remember that a suit of mail was but a small matter in those days, for in every English town such things could be made. But year by year since men have come to take more care of their bodies, there have been added a plate of proof here and a cunning joint there, and all must be from Toledo or Milan, so that a knight must have much metal in his purse ere he puts any on his limbs. Nigel looked up wistfully at the old armor which was slung on the beams above him. The ash spear is good, said he, and so is the oaken shield with facings of steel. Sir Roger Fitzellen handled them and said that he had never seen better. But the armor. Lady Ermintrude shook her old head and laughed. You have your father's great soul, Nigel, but you have not his mighty breadth of shoulder and length of limb. There was not in all the king's great host a taller or stronger man. His harness would be little use to you. No, fair son, I rede you that when the time comes you sell this crumbling house and the few acres which is still left, and so go forth to the wars in the hope that with your own right hand you will plant the fortunes of a new house of Loring. A shadow of anger passed over Nigel's fresh young face. I know not if we may hold off these monks and their lawyers much longer. This very day there came a man from Guildford with claims from the abbey extending back before my father's death. Where are they, fair son? They are flapping on the furze bushes of Hankley, for I sent his papers and parchments downwind as fast as ever falcon flew. Nay, you were mad to do that, Nigel. And the man, where is he? Red Swire and old George the archer threw him into the Thursday bog. The abbot would not hurt us. It is that grey lane wolf of a sacrist who hungers for our land. Let him do his worst. I fear him not. He has such an engine at his back, Nigel, that even the bravest must fear him. The ban which blasts a man's soul is in the keeping of his church, and what have we to place against it? I pray you to speak him fair, Nigel. Nay, Dear lady, it is both my duty and my pleasure to do what you bid me. But I would die ere I ask as a favor that which we can claim as a right. Never can I cast my eyes from yonder window that I do not see the swelling downlands and the rich meadows, glade and dingle, copse and wood, which have been ours since Norman William gave them to that Loring who bore his shield at Senlac. Now, by trick and fraud, they have passed away from us, and many a Franklin is a richer man than I, but never shall it be said that I saved the rest by bending my neck to their yoke. Let them do their worst, and let me endure to fight it as best I may. The old lady sighed and shook her head. You speak as a Loring should, and yet I fear that some great trouble will befall us. But let us talk no more of such matters, since we cannot mend them. Where is your Satoli? Nigel, will you not play and sing to me? The gentleman of those days could scarce read and write, but he spoke in 2 languages, played at least 1 musical instrument as a matter of course, and possessed a number of other accomplishments, from the imping of hawk's feathers to the mystery of venery, with knowledge of every beast and bird, its time of grace and when it was seasonable. As far as physical feats went, to vault barebacked upon a horse, to hit a running hare with a crossbow bolt, or to climb the angle of a castle courtyard, were feats which had come by nature to the young squire. But it was very different with music, which had called for many a weary hour of irksome work. Now at last he could master the strings, but both his ear and his voice were not of the best, so that it was well perhaps that there was so small and so unprejudiced an audience of the Norman French chanson, which he sang in a high reedy voice with great earnestness of feeling, but with many a slip and quaver, waving his yellow head in cadence to the music. Serene and high and bold to try the hazard of the chance, with strength to wait, but fix his fate a plan in day and do, the peer of all and only thrall, sweet lady mine, to you. It may have been that the sentiment went for more than the music, or it may have been the nicety of her own ears had been dulled by age, but old Dame Ermintrude clapped her lean hands together and cried out in shrill applause. Weathercote has indeed had an apt pupil, she said. I pray you that you will sing again. Nay, dear dame, it is turn and turn betwixt you and me. I beg that you will recite a romance, you who know them all. For all the years that I have listened, I have never yet come to the end of them, and I dare swear that there are more in your head than in all the great books which they showed me at Guildford Castle. I would fain hear Doon of Mayence, or the Song of Roland, or Sir Isumbras. So the old dame broke into a long poem, slow and dull in the inception, but quickening as the interest grew, until with doubting hands and glowing face, she poured forth the verses which told of the emptiness of sordid life, the beauty of heroic death, the high sacredness of love and the bondage of honor. Nigel, with set, still features and brooding eyes, drank in the fiery words, until at last they died upon the old woman's lips, and she sank back weary in her chair. Nigel stooped over her and kissed her brow. Your words will ever be as a star upon my path, said he. Then, carrying over the small table and the chessmen, he proposed that they should play the usual game before they sought their rooms for the night. But a sudden and rude interruption broke in upon their gentle contest. A dog pricked its ears and barked. The others ran growling to the door. And then there came a sharp clash of arms, a dull heavy blow from a club or sword pummel, and a deep voice from without summoned them to open in the king's name. The old dame and Nigel had both sprung to their feet, their table overturned and their chessmen scattered among the rushes. Nigel's hand had sought his crossbow, but the Lady Ermintrude grasped his arm. Nay, fair son, have you not heard that it is in the king's name? Said she. Down, Talbot, down, Bayard. Open the door and let his messenger in. Nigel undid the bolt, and the heavy wooden door swung outward upon its hinges. The light from a flaring cressets beat upon steel caps and fierce bearded faces, with a glimmer of drawn swords and the yellow gleam of bowstaves. A dozen armed archers forced their way into the room. At their head were the gaunt sacrist of Waverley and a stout elderly man clad in a red velvet doublet and breeches much stained and mottled with mud and clay. He bore a great sheet of parchment with a fringe of dangling seals, which he held aloft as he entered. I am he. Yes, it is he, cried the sacrist. Archers, do as you were ordered. In an instant the band threw themselves upon him like the hounds on a stag. Desperately Nigel strove to gain his sword, which lay upon the iron coffer. With a convulsive strength which comes from the spirit rather than from the body, he bore them all in that direction. But the sacrist snatched the weapon from its place, and the rest dragged the writhing squire to the ground and swathed him in a cord. "Hold him fast, good archers. Keep a stout grip on him," cried the summoner. "I pray you, one of you, prick off these great dogs which snarl at my heels. Stand off, I say, in the name of the king. Watkin, come betwixt me and these creatures who have as little regard for the law as their master." One of the archers kicked off the faithful dogs. But there were others of the household who were equally ready to show their teeth in defense of the old house of Loring. From the door which led to their quarters there emerged a pitiful muster of Nigel's threadbare retainers. There was a time when 10 knights, 40 men-at-arms, and 200 archers would march behind the scarlet roses. Now at this last rally, when the young head of the house lay bound in his own hole, there mustered at his call the page Charles with a cudgel, John the cook with his longest spit, Red Swire the aged man-at-arms with a formidable axe swung over his snowy head, and Weathercoat the minstrel with a boar-spear. Yet this motley array was fired with the spirit of the house, and under the lead of the fierce old soldier they would certainly have flung themselves upon the ready swords of the archers, had the Lady Ermyntrude not swept between them. "Stand back, Swire," she cried. "Back, Weathercoat Charles, put a leash on Talbot, and hold Bayard back." Her black eyes blazed upon the invaders until they shrank from their baleful gaze. "Who are you, you rascal robbers, who dare to misuse a king's name and to lay hands upon one whose smallest drop of blood is more worth than all your thrall and caitiff bodies?" "Nay, not so fast, dame, not so fast, I pray you," cried the stout summoner, whose face had resumed its natural colour, now that he had a woman to deal with. "There is a law of England, mark you, and there are those who serve and uphold it, who are the true men and the king's own lieges. Such a one am I. Then again, there are those who take such as me and transfer, carry or convey us into a bog or morass. Such a one is this graceless old man with the axe, whom I have seen already this day. There are also those who destroy, or scatter the papers of the law, of which this young man is the chief. Therefore, I would rede you, dame, not to rail against us, but to understand that we are the king's men on the king's own service. What then is your errand in this house at this hour of the night?" The summoner cleared his throat pompously, and turning his parchment to the light of the cressets, he read out a long document in Norman French, couched in such a style and such a language that the most involved and foolish of our forms was simplicity itself compared to those by which the men of the long gown made a mystery of that which of all things on earth should be the plainest and the most simple. Despair fell cold upon Nigel's heart and blanched the face of the old dame as they listened to the dread catalogue of claims and suits and issues, questions of peccary and turbary, of houseboat and fireboat, which ended by a demand for all the lands, hereditaments, tenements, messuage and curtilage, which made up their worldly all. Nigel, still bound, had been placed with his back against the iron coffer, whence he heard with dry lips and moist brow this doom of his house. Now he broke in on the recital with a vehemence which made the summoner jump. "Therefore," said the stern monk, "it is the order of the Holy Father Abbot that you sleep this night in the abbey cell, and that tomorrow you be brought before him at the court held in the chapter house, so that you receive the fit punishment for this and the many other violent and froward deeds which you have wrought upon the servants of Holy Church. Enough is now said. Worthy Master Summoner, archers, remove your prisoner." As Nigel was lifted up by 4 stout archers, the Dame Ermyntrude would have rushed to his aid, but the sacrist thrust her back. The old dame flamed suddenly into white wrath as she stood before the angry monk. "Listen to me while I lay a curse upon you and yours," she cried as she raised her shriveled arms and blighted him with her flashing eyes. "As you have done to the house of Loring, so may God do to you, until your power is swept from the land of England, and of your great abbey of Waverley there is nothing left but a pile of grey stones in a green meadow. I see it, I see it, with my old eyes I see it. From scullion to abbot and from cellar to tower, may Waverley and all within it droop and wither from this night on." The law of the Middle Ages, shrouded as it was in old Norman French dialect, and abounding in uncouth and incomprehensible terms, in deodans and harriets, in infang and outfang, was a fearsome weapon in the hands of those who knew how to use it. It was not for nothing that the first act of the rebel commoners was to hew off the head of the Lord Chancellor. In an age when few knew how to read or to write, these mystic phrases and intricate forms, with the parchments and seals which were their outward expression, struck cold terror into hearts which were steeled against me physical danger. Even young Nigel Loring's blithe and elastic spirit was chilled as he lay that night in the penal cell of Waverley and pondered over the absolute ruin which threatened his house from a source against which all his courage was of no avail. As well take up sword and shield to defend himself against the Black Death as against this blight of Holy Church. He was powerless in the grip of the Abbey. Already they had shorn off a field here and a grove there, and now in one sweep they would take in the rest. And where then was the home of the Lorings, and where should Lady Ermintrude lay her aged head, or his old retainers, broken and spent, eke out the balance of their days? He shivered as he thought of it. With the simple and practical piety of the age, he prayed for the aid of his own particular saints, of St. Paul, whose adventures by land and sea had always endeared him, of St. George, who had gained much honorable advancement from the dragon, and of St. Thomas, who was a gentleman of coat armor, who would understand and help a person of gentle blood. Then, much comforted by his naive orisons, he enjoyed the sleep of youth and health until the entrance of the lay brother with the bread and small beer, which served as breakfast in the morning. The abbey court set in the chapter house at the canonical hour of tis, which was 9 in the forenoon. At all times a function was a solemn one, even when the culprit might be a villain who was taken poaching on the abbey estate, or a chapman who had given false measure from his biased scales. But now, when a man of noble birth was to be tried, the whole legal and ecclesiastical ceremony was carried out with every detail, grotesque or impressive, which the full ritual prescribed. The distant roll of church music and the slow tolling of the abbey bell, the white-robed brethren, 2 and 2, walked thrice round the whole singing the Benedicite and the Veni Creator before they settled in their places at the desks on either side. Then in turn each high officer of the abbey from below upward, the almoner, the lector, the chaplain, the subprior and the prior, swept to their wonted places. Finally there came the grim sacrist, with demure triumph upon his downcast features, and at his heels Abbot John himself, slow and dignified, with pompous walk and solemn, composed face, his iron-beaded rosary swinging from his waist, his breviary in his hand, and his lips muttering as he hurried through his office for the day. He knelt at his high prie-dieu. The brethren, at a signal from the prior, prostrate themselves upon the floor, and the low, deep voices rolled in prayer, echoed back from the arched and vaulted roof like the wash of waves from an ocean cavern. Finally the monks resumed their seats. They entered clerks in seemly black with pens and parchment. The red velveted summoner appeared to tell his tale. Nigel was led and with archers pressing close around him. And then, with much calling of old French and much legal incantation and mystery, the court of the abbey was open for business. It was the sacrist who first advanced to the oaken desk reserved for the witnesses and expounded in hard, dry, mechanical fashion the many claims which the house of Waverley had against the family of Loring. Some generations back, in return for money advanced, or for spiritual favor, received, the Loring of the day had admitted that his estate had certain feudal duties toward the abbey. The sacrist held up the crackling yellow parchment with swinging leaden seals on which the claim was based. Amid the obligations was that of escuage, by which the price of a knight's fee should be paid every year. No such price had been paid, nor had any service been done. The accumulated years came now to a greater sum than the fee simple of the estate. Nigel listened to the dread recital, and felt like some young stag who stands at bay with brave pose and heart of fire, but who sees himself compassed round and knows clearly that there is no escape. With his bold young face, his steady blue eyes, and the proud poise of his head, he was a worthy sign of the old house, and the sun, shining through the high oriel window and showing up the stained and threadbare condition of his once rich doublet, seemed to illuminate the fallen fortunes of his family. The sacrist had finished his exposition, and the sergeant-at-law was about to conclude a case which Nigel could in no way controvert, when help came to him from an unexpected quarter. It may have been a certain malignity with which the sacrist urged his suit, it may have been a diplomatic dislike to driving matters to extremes, or it may have been some genuine impulse of kindliness, for Abbot John was choleric but easily appeased. whatever the cause. The result was that a white plump hand, raised in the air with a gesture of authority, showed that the case was at an end. Our brother Sacred has done his duty in urging this suit, said he, for the worldly wealth of this abbey is placed in his pious keeping, and it is to him that we should look if we suffered in such ways, for we are but the trustees of those who come after us. But to my keeping has been consigned that which is more precious still, the inner spirit and high repute of those who follow the rule of St. Bernard. Now it has ever been our endeavor, since first our saintly founder went down into the valley of Clairvaux and built himself a cell there, that we should set an example to all men in gentleness and humility. For this reason it is that we build our houses in lowly places, that we have no tower to our abbey churches, and that no finery and no metal, save only iron or lead, come within our walls. A brother shall eat from a wooden platter, drink from an iron cup, and light himself from a leaden sconce. Surely it is not for such an order who await the exaltation which is promised to the humble, to judge their own case and so acquire the lands of their neighbor. If our cause be just, as indeed I believe that it is, then it were better that it be judged at the King's Assizes at Guildford, and so I decree that the case be now dismissed from the Abbey Court so that it can be heard elsewhere. Nigel breathed a prayer to the 3 sturdy saints who had stood by him so manfully and well in the hour of his need. Abbot John, said he, I never thought that any man of my name would utter thanks to a Cistercian of Waverley, but by St. Paul, you have spoken like a man this day, for it would indeed be to play with card dice if the Abbey's case is to be tried in the Abbey Court. The 80 white-clad brethren looked with half resentful, half amused eyes as they listened to this frank address to one who, in their small lives, seemed to be the direct vice-regent of heaven. The archers had stood back from Nigel, as though he was at liberty to go, when the loud voice of the summoner broke in upon the silence. If it please you, Holy Father Abbot, cried the voice, this decision of yours is indeed secundum legem and intra viri so far as the civil suit is concerned which lies between this person and the abbey. That is your affair. But it is I, Joseph the Summoner, who have been grievously and criminally mishandled, my writs, papers, and indentures destroyed, my authority flouted, and my person dragged through a bog, quagmire, or morass, so that my velvet gabardine and silver badge of office were lost in air, as I verily believe, in the morass, quagmire, or bog aforementioned, which is the same bog, morass. Enough, cried the abbot sternly. Lay aside this foolish fashion of speech, and say straightly what you desire. Holy Father, I have been the officer of the King's law no less than the servant of Holy Church, and I have been hindered and assaulted in the performance of my lawful and proper duties. Whilst my papers, drawn in the King's name, have been shended and rendered and cast to the wind. Therefore, I demand justice upon this man in the Abbey Court, the said assault having been committed within the banlieue of the Abbey's jurisdiction. What have you to say to this, brother sacrist? Asked the abbot in some perplexity. I would say, Father, that it is within our power to deal gently and charitably with all that concerns ourselves, but that where the King's officer is concerned we are wanting in our duty if we get him less than the protection that he demands. I would remind you also, Holy Father, that this is not the first of this man's violence, but that he has before now beaten our servants, defied our authority, and put pike in the abbot's own fishpond. The prelate's heavy cheeks flushed with anger as this old grievance came fresh into his mind. His eyes hardened as he looked at the prisoner. Tell me, Squire Nigel, did you indeed put pike in the pond? The young man drew himself proudly up. I answer such a question. Father Abbot, do you answer one from me, and tell me what the monks of Waverley have ever done for me that I should hold my hand when I could injure them? A low murmur ran round the room, partly wonder at his frankness, and partly anger at his boldness. The abbot settled down in his seat as one who has made up his mind. Let the case of the summoner be laid before me, said he. Justice shall be done, and the offender shall be punished, be he noble or simple. Let the plaint be brought before the court. The tale of the summoner, though rambling and filled with endless legal reiteration, was only too clear in its essence. Red Swire, with his angry face framed in white bristles, was led in and confessed his ill-treatment of the official. A second culprit, a little wiry nut-brown archer from Churt, had aided and abetted in the deed. Both of them were ready to declare that young Squire Nigel Loring knew nothing of the matter. But then there was the awkward incident of the tearing of the writs. Nigel, to whom a lie was an impossibility, had to admit that with his own hands he had shredded those august documents. As to an excuse or an explanation, he was too proud to advance any. A cloud gathered over the brow of the abbot, and the sacrist gazed with an ironical smile at the prisoner, while a solemn hush fell over the chapter house as the case ended and only judgment remained. "Squire Nigel," said the abbot, "it was for you, who are, as all men know, of ancient lineage in this land, to give a fair example by which others should set their conduct. Instead of this, your manor house has ever been a center for the stirring up of strife, and now not content with your harsh showing toward us, the Cistercian monks of Waverley, you have even marked your contempt for the king's law, and through your servants have mishandled the person of his messenger. For such offenses it is in my power to call the spiritual terrors of the church upon your head, and yet I would not be harsh with you, seeing that you are young, and that even last week you saved the life of a servant of the abbey when in peril. Therefore, it is by temporal and carnal means that I will use my power to tame your overbold spirit, and to chasten that headstrong and violent humor, which has caused such scandal in your dealings with our abbey. Bread and water for 6 weeks from now to the feast of St. Benedict, with a daily exhortation from our chaplain, the pious Father Ambrose, may still avail to bend the stiff neck and to soften the hard heart. At this ignominious sentence by which the proud heir of the house of Loring would share the fate of the meanest village poacher, the hot blood of Nigel rushed to his face, and as I glanced round him with a gleam which said more plainly than words that there could be no tame acceptance of such a doom. Twice he tried to speak, and twice his anger and his shame held the words in his throat. "I am no subject of yours, proud abbot," he cried at last. "My house has ever been vassal to the king. I deny the power of you and your court to lay sentence upon me. Punish these your own monks, who whimper at your frown, but do not dare to lay your hand upon him who fears you not, for he is a free man, and the peer of any save only the king himself." The abbot seemed for an instant taken aback by these bold words, and by the high and strenuous voice in which they were uttered. But the sterner sacrist came as ever to stiffen his will. He held up the old parchment in his hand. "The Lorings were indeed vassals to the king," said he, "but here is the very seal of Eustace Loring which shows that he made himself vassal to the abbey and held his land from it." "Because he was gentle," cried Nigel, "because he had no thought of trick or guile." "Besides," said the sacrist, "sentence is passed by the abbey court, and there is an end of its honor and good name if it be not upheld." "Brother sacrist," said the abbot angrily, "methinks you show overmuch zeal in this case, and certes, we are well able to uphold the dignity and honor of the abbey court without any rede of thine. As to you, worthy summoner, you will give your opinion when we crave for it, and not before, or you may yourself get some touch of the power of our tribunal. But your case have been tried, Squire Loring, and judgment given. I have no more to say." He motioned with his hand, and an archer laid his grip upon the shoulder of the prisoner. But that rough plebeian touch woke every passion of revolt in Nigel's spirit. Of all his high line of ancestors, was there one who had been subjected to such ignominy as this? Would they not have preferred death? And should he be the first to lower their spirit or their traditions? With a quick, lithe movement, he slipped under the arm of the archer, and plucked the short, straight sword from the soldier's side as he did so. The next instant he had wedged himself into the recess of one of the narrow windows, and there were his pale, set face, his burning eyes, and his ready blade turned upon the assembly. "By St. Paul," said he, "I never thought to find honorable advancement under the roof of an abbey, but perchance there may be some room for it ere you hale me to your prison." The chapter house was in an uproar. Never in the long and decorous history of the abbey had such a scene been witnessed within its walls. The monks themselves seemed for an instant to be infected by the spirit of daring revolt. Their own lifelong fetters hung more loosely as they viewed this unheard-of defiance of authority. They broke from their seats on either side and huddled half-scared, half-fascinated, in a large half-circle round the defiant captive, chattering, pointing, grimacing, a scandal for all time. Scourges should fall and penance be done for many a long week before the shadow of that day should pass from Waverley. But meanwhile there was no effort to bring them back to their rule. Everything was chaos and disorder. The abbot had left his seat of justice and hurried angrily forward, to be engulfed and hustled in the crowd of his own monks like a sheepdog who finds himself entangled amid a flock. Only the sacrist stood clear. He had taken shelter behind the half-dozen archers, who looked with some approval and a good deal of indecision at this bold fugitive from justice. "On him!" cried the sacrist. "Shall he defy the authority of the court, or shall one man hold 6 of you at bay? Close in upon him and seize him. You, battlesman, why do you hold back?" The man in question, a tall, bushy-bearded fellow, clad like the others in green jerkin and breeches with high brown boots, advanced slowly, sword in hand, against Nigel. His heart was not in the business, for these clerical courts were not popular, and everyone had a tender heart for the fallen fortunes of the House of Loring and wished well to its young heir. "Come, young sir, you have caused scathe enough," said he. "Stand forth and give yourself up." "Come and fetch me, good fellow," said Nigel with a dangerous smile. The archer ran in. There was a rasp of steel, a blade flickered like a swift dart of flame, and the man staggered back, with blood running down his forearm and dripping from his fingers. He wrung them and growled a Saxon oath. "By the black rood of Bromholm," he cried, "I had as soon put my hand down a fox's oath to drag up a vixen from her cubs." "Stand off," said Nigel curtly. "I would not hurt you, but by St. Paul, I will not be handled, or someone will be hurt in the handling." So fierce was his eye and so menacing his blade as he crouched in the narrow bay of the window that the little knot of archers were at a loss what to do. The abbot had forced his way through the crowd and stood, purple with outraged dignity, at their side. The man, who was one of the abbey's lay servants, put his weight upon his long bow and slipped the loose end of the string into the upper notch. Then, drawing one of the terrible 3-foot arrows, steel-tipped and gaudily winged, from his waist, he laid it to the string. "Now draw your bow and hold it ready," cried the furious abbot. "Squire Nigel, it is not for Holy Church to shed blood, but there is naught but violence which will prevail against the violent, and on your head be the sin. Cast down the sword which you hold in your hand. Will you give me freedom to leave your abbey, when you have abided your sentence and purged your sin? Then I had rather die where I stand than give up my sword." A dangerous flame lit in the abbot's eyes. He came of a fighting Norman stock, like so many of those fierce prelates who, bearing a mace lest they should be guilty of effusion of blood, led their troops into battle, ever remembering that it was one of their own cloth and dignity who, crozier in hand, had turned the long-drawn bloody day of Hastings. The soft accent of the churchman was gone, and it was the hard voice of a soldier which said, "1 minute I give you, and no more. Then when I cry loose, drive me an arrow through his body." The shaft was fitted, the bow was bent, and the stern eyes of the woodman were fixed on his mark. Slowly the minute passed, while Nigel breathed a prayer to his 3 soldier saints, not that they should save his body in this life, but that they should have a kindly care for his soul in the next. Some thought of a fierce wildcat sally crossed his mind, but once out of his corner he was lost indeed. Yet at the last he would have rushed among his enemies, and his body was bent for the spring, when with a deep sonorous hum, like a breaking harp-string, the cord of the bow was cloven in twain, and the arrow tinkled upon the tiled floor. At the same moment a young curly-headed bowman, whose broad shoulders and deep chest told of immense strength, as clearly as his frank, laughing face and honest hazel eyes did of good humour and courage, sprang forward sword in hand, and took his place by Nigel's side. "Nay, comrades," said he, "Samkin Aylward cannot stand by and see a gallant man shot down like a bull at the end of a baiting. 5 against 1 is long odds, but 2 against 4 is better, and by my finger bones, Squire Nigel and I leave this room together, be it on our feet or no." The formidable appearance of this ally and his high reputation among his fellows gave a further chill to the lukewarm ardor of the attack. Aylward's left arm was passed through his strung bow, and he was known from Woolmer Forest to the Weald as the quickest, surest archer that ever dropped a running deer at 10 score paces. "Nay, battlesmen, hold your fingers from your string case, or I may chance to give your drawing hand a 2 months' rest," said Aylward. "Swords, if you will, comrades, but no man's strings his bow till I have loosed mine." Yet the angry hearts of both abbot and sacrist rose higher with a fresh obstacle. "This is an ill day for your father," Franklin Aylward, who holds the tenancy of Crooksbury, said the sacrist. He will rue it that ever he begot a son who will lose him his acres and his steading. My father is a bold yeoman, and would rue it evermore that ever his son should stand by while foul work was afoot, said Aylward stoutly. Fall on, comrades, we are waiting. Encouraged by promises of reward if they should fall in the service of the abbey, and by threats of penalties if they should hold back, the four archers were about to close, when a singular interruption gave an entirely new turn to the proceedings. At the door of the chapter house, while these fiery doings had been afoot, there had assembled a mixed crowd of lay brothers, servants and varlets who had watched the development of the drama with the interest and delight with which men hail a sudden break in a dull routine. Suddenly there was an agitation at the back of this group, then a swirl in the center, and finally the front rank was violently thrust aside, and through the gap there emerged a strange and whimsical figure, who from the instant of his appearance dominated both chapter house and abbey, monks, prelates, and archers, as if he were their owner and their master. He was a man somewhat about middle age, with thin lemon-colored hair, a curling mustache, a tufted chin of the same hue, and a high craggy face, all running to a great hook of the nose, like the beak of an eagle. His skin was tanned to brown-red by much exposure to the wind and sun. In height he was tall, and his figure was thin and loose-jointed, but stringy and hard-bitten. One eye was entirely covered by its lid, which lay flat over an empty socket, but the other danced and sparkled with most roguish light, darting here and there with a twinkle of humor and criticism and intelligence, the whole fire of his soul bursting through that one narrow cranny. Such was the man, quaint, critical, masterful, with a touch of what is formidable behind it, who now surveyed the opposing groups of armed men and angry monks with an eye which commanded their attention. "Excuses," said he, in a lisping French. "Excuses, Miss Amos. I had thought to arouse from prayer or meditation, but never have I seen such a holy exercise as this under an abbey's roof, with swords for breviaries and archers for acolytes. I fear that I have come amiss, and yet I ride on an errand from one who permits no delay." The abbot, and possibly the sacrist also, had begun to realize that events had gone a great deal farther than they had intended, and that without an extreme scandal it was no easy matter for them to save their dignity and the good name of Waverley. Therefore, in spite of the debonair, not to say disrespectful, bearing of the newcomer, they rejoiced at his appearance and intervention. The abbot's smile turned to a frown at these frank words. "It would become you better, sir, to deliver the message of which you say that you are the bearer, than to uphold a prisoner against the rightful judgment of a court." The stranger swept the court with his questioning eye. "The message is not for you, good Father Abbot. It is for one whom I know not. I have been to his house, and they have sent me hither. The name is Nigel Loring. It is for me, fair sir." "You know not the truth of this matter," said the abbot. "If you are a loyal man, you will stand aside, for this young man hath grievously offended against the law, and it is for the king's lieges to give us their support." "And you have haled him up for judgment," cried the stranger with much amusement. "It is as though a rookery set in judgment upon a falcon. I warrant that you have found it easier to judge than to punish. Let me tell you, Father Abbot, that this standeth not aright. When powers such as these were given to the like of you, they were given that you might check a brawling underling or correct a drunken woodman, and not that you might drag the best blood in England to your bar and set your archers on him if he questioned your findings." The abbot was little used to hear such words of reproof uttered in so stern a voice under his own abbey roof, and before his listening monks. "You may perchance find an abbey court has more powers than you wot of, Sir Knight," said he, "if knight indeed you be who are so uncourteous and short in your speech. Ere we go further, I would ask your name and style." The stranger laughed. "It is easy to see that you are indeed men of peace," said he proudly. "Had I shown this sign," and he touched the token upon his lapels, "whether on shield or pennon, in the marches of France or Scotland, there is not a cavalier but would have known the red pile of Chandos. Chandos, John Chandos, the flower of English chivalry, the pink of knight-errantry, the hero already of 50 desperate enterprises, a man known and honored from end to end of Europe." Nigel gazed at him as one who sees a vision. The archers stood back abashed, while the monks crowded closer to stare at the famous soldier of the French wars. The abbot abated his tone, and a smile came to his angry face. "We are indeed men of peace," said John, "and little skilled in warlike blazonry," said he. "Yet stout as our abbey walls, they are not so thick that the fame of your exploits has not passed through them and reached our ears. If it be your pleasure to take an interest in this young and misguided squire, it is not for us to thwart your kind intention or to withhold such grace as you request. I am glad indeed that he is one who can set him so fair an example for a friend." "I thank you for your courtesy, good Father Abbot," said Chandos carelessly. "This young squire has, however, a better friend than myself, one who is kinder to those he loves and more terrible to those he hates. It is from him I bear a message." "I pray you, fair and honoured sir," said Nigel, "that you will tell me what is the message that you bear." "The message, mon ami, is that your friend comes into these parts and would have a night's lodging at the manor house of Tilford for the love and respect that he bears your family." "Nay, he is most welcome," said Nigel, "and yet I hope that he is one who can relish a soldier's fare and sleep under a humble roof, for indeed we can but give our best, poor as it is." "He is indeed a soldier and a good one," Chandos answered, laughing, "and I warrant he has slept in rougher quarters than Tilford Manor House." "I have few friends, fair sir," said Nigel, with a puzzled face. "I pray you give me this gentleman's name." "His name is Edward." "Sir Edward Mortimer of Kent, perchance, or is it Sir Edward Brocas of whom the Lady Ermyntrude talks?" "Nay, he is known as Edward only, and if you ask a second name it is Plantagenet, for he who comes to seek the shelter of your roof is your liege lord and mine, the King's High Majesty, Edward of England." Chapter 6, in which Lady Ermyntrude opens the iron coffer. As in a dream, Nigel heard these stupendous and incredible words. As in a dream, also he had a vision of a smiling and conciliatory abbot, of an obsequious sacrist, and of a band of archers who cleared a path for him and for the king's messenger through the motley crowd who had choked the entrance of the abbey court. A minute later, he was walking by the side of Chandos through the peaceful cloister, and in front in the open archway of the great gate was the broad yellow road between its borders of green meadowland. The spring air was the sweeter and the more fragrant for that chill dread of Dishna and captivity which had so recently frozen his ardent heart. He had already passed the portal when a hand plucked at his sleeve, and he turned to find himself confronted by the brown, honest face and hazel eyes of the archer who had interfered in his behalf. "Well," said Aylward, "what have you to say to me, young sir?" "What can I say, my good fellow, save that I thank you with all my heart? By St. Paul, if you had been my blood brother, you could not have stood by me more stoutly. Nay, but this is not enough." Nigel coloured with vexation, and the more so as Chandos was listening with his critical smile to their conversation. "If you had heard what was said in the court," said he, "you would understand that I am not blessed at this moment with much of this world's gear. The Black Death and the monks have between them been heavy upon our estate. Willingly would I give you a handful of gold for your assistance, since that is what you seem to crave. But indeed I have it not, and so once more I say that you must be satisfied with my thanks." "Your gold is nothing to me," said Aylward shortly, "nor would you buy my loyalty if you filled my wallet with rose nobles, so long as you were not a man after my own heart. But I have seen you back the yellow horse, and I have seen you face the Abbot of Waverley, and you are such a master as I would very gladly serve if you had by chance a place for such a man. I have seen your following, and I doubt not that they were stout fellows in your grandfather's time. But which of them now would draw a bowstring to his ear? Through you I have left the service of the Abbey of Waverley, and where can I look now for a post? If I stay here I am all undone like a fretted bowstring." "Nay, there can be no difficulty there," said Chandos. "Pardieu, a roistering, swaggering daredevil archer is worth his price on the French border. There are 200 such who march behind my own person, and I would ask nothing better than to see you among them." "I thank you, noble sir, for your offer," said Aylward, "and I had rather follow your banner than many another one, for it is well known that it goes ever forward, and I have heard enough of the wars to know that there are small pickings for the man who lags behind. Yet, if the squire will have me, I would choose to fight under the 5 roses of Loring, For though I was born in the 100 of Easebourne and the rape of Chichester, yet I have grown up and learned to use a longbow in these parts, and as a free son of a free franklin I had rather serve my own neighbour than a stranger. My good fellow, said Nigel, I have told you that I could in no wise reward you for such service. If you will but take me to the wars, I will see to my own reward, said Aylward. Till then I ask for none, save a corner of your table and 6 feet of your floor, for it is certain that the only reward I would get from the abbey for this day's work would be the scourge from my back and the stocks from my ankles. Samkin Aylward is your man, Squire Nigel, from this hour on, and by these 10 finger bones he trusts the devil will fly away with him if ever he gives you cause to regret it. So saying, he raised his hand to his steel cap in salute, slung his great yellow bow over his back, and followed on some paces in the rear of his new master. It was indeed the formidable figure of the Lady Ermintrude, gaunt, bowed and leaning on her staff, which had emerged from the door of the manor house and advanced to greet them. She croaked with laughter and shook her stick at the great building as she heard of the discomfiture of the abbey court. Then she led the way into the hall where the best which it could provide had been laid out for their illustrious guest. There was Chandos' blood in her own veins, traceable back through the de Greys, de Moultons, de Valences, de Montagues, and other high and noble strains, so that the meal had been eaten and cleared before she had done tracing the network of intermarriages and connections, with quarterings, impalements, lozenges, and augmentations by which the blazonry of the 2 families might be made to show a common origin. Back to the Conquest and before it, there was not a noble family tree, every twig and bud of which was not familiar to the Dame Ermintrude. And now, when the trestles were cleared and the 3 were left alone in the hall, Chandos broke his message to the lady. King Edward hath ever borne in mind that noble knight your son Sir Eustace, said he. He will journey to Southampton next week, and I am his harbinger. He bade me say, noble and honoured lady, that he would come from Guildford in any easy stage so that he might spend one night under your roof. The old dame flushed with pleasure, and then turned white with vexation at the words. It is in truth great honour to the house of Loring, said she, yet our roof is now humble and, as you have seen, our affairs plain. The king knows not that we are so poor. I fear lest we seem churlish and niggard in his eyes. Chandos was a ride on to Farnham Castle and beyond, but he expressed his desire to have a warm bath ere he left Tilford, for like most of his fellow knights, he was much addicted to simmering in the hottest water that he could possibly endure. The bath, therefore, a high-hooped arrangement like a broader but shorter chone, was carried into the privacy of the guest chamber, and it was that Nigel was summoned to hold him company while he stewed and sweltered in his tub. Nigel perched himself upon the side of the high bed, swinging his legs over the edge and gazing with wonder and amusement at the quaint face, the ruffled yellow hair, and the sinewy shoulders of the famous warrior, dimly seen amid a pillar of steam. He was in a mood for talk. So Nigel with eager lips plied him with 1,000 questions about the wars, hanging upon every word which came back to him, like those of the ancient oracles, out of the mist and the cloud. To Chandos himself, the old soldier for whom war had lost its freshness, it was a renewal of his own ardent youth to listen to Nigel's rapid questions and to mark the rapt attention with which he listened. Tell me of the Welsh. Honoured sir, asked the squire, what manner of soldiers are the Welsh? They are very valiant men of war, said Chandos, splashing about in his tub. There is good skirmishing to be had in their valleys, if you ride with a small following. They flare up like a furze bush in the flames, but if for a short space you may abide the heat of it, then there is a chance that it may be cooler. The Scotch knights have no masters in the world, and he who can hold his own with the best of them, be it a Douglas, a Murray, or a Seaton, has nothing more to learn. Though you be a hard man, you will always meet as hard a one if you ride northward. If the Welsh be like the furze fire, then, pardieu, the Scotch are the peat, for they will smoulder and you will never come to the end of them. I have had many happy hours on the marches of Scotland, for even if there be no or the Percys of Ennick, or the governor of Carlisle can still raise a little bickering with the border clans. I bear in mind that my father was wont to say that they were very stout spearmen. No better in the world, for the spears are 12 foot long and they hold them in very thick array, but their archers are weak, save only the men of Ettrick and Selkirk who come from a forest. I pray you to open the lattice. Nigel, for the steam is overthick. Now in Wales it is the spearmen who are weak, and there are no archers in these islands like the men of Gwent with their bows of elm, which shoot with such power that I have known a cavalier to have his horse killed when the shaft had passed through his mail breeches, his thigh and his saddle. And yet, what is the most strongly shot arrow to these new balls of iron driven by the fire powder, which will crush a man's armor as an egg is crushed by a stone? Our fathers knew them not. Then the better for us, cried Nigel, since there is at least one honorable venture which is all our own. Chandos chuckled and turned upon the flushed youth a twinkling and sympathetic eye. You have a fashion of speech which carries me back to the old men whom I met in my boyhood, said he. There were some of the real old knight-errants left in those days, and they spoke as you do. Young as you are, you belong to another age. Where got you that trick of thought and word? I have had only one to teach me, the Lady Ermintrude. Pardieu, she has trained a proper young hawk ready to stoop at a lordly quarry, said Chandos. I would that I had the first unhoarding of you. Will you not ride with me to the wars? The tears brimmed over from Nigel's eyes, and he wrung the gaunt hand extended from the bath. By St. Paul, what could I ask better in the world? I fear to leave her, for she has none other to care for her. But if it can in any way be arranged, what could man wish for more? Is there a squire in England who would not serve under the banner of Chandos? Whither do you go, fair sir? And when do you go? Is it to Scotland? Is it to Ireland? Is it to France? But alas, alas! The eager face had clouded. For the instant he had forgotten that a suit of armor was as much beyond his means as a service of gold plate. Down in a twinkling came all his high hopes to the ground. Oh, these sordid material things, which come between our dreams and their fulfillment. The squire of such a knight must dress with the best. Yet all the fee simple of Tilford would scarce suffice for one suit of plate. Chandos, with his quick wit and knowledge of the world, had guessed the cause of this sudden change. If you fight under my banner, it is for me to find the weapons, said he. Nay, I will not be denied. But Nigel shook his head sadly. It may not be. The Lady Ermintrude would sell this old house and every acre round it, ere she would permit me to accept this gracious bounty which you offer. Yet I do not despair. For only last week I won for myself a noble war horse for which I paid no penny, so perchance a suit of armor may also come my way. And how won you the horse? It was given me by the monks of Waverley. This is wonderful. Pardieu, I should have expected, from what I had seen, that they would have given you little save their malediction. They had no use for the horse, and they gave it to me. Then we have only to find some one who has no use for a suit of armor, and will give it to you. Yet I trust that you will think better of it and let me, since that good lady proves that I am your kinsman, fit you for the wars. I thank you, noble sir, and if I should turn to anyone it would indeed be to you, but there are other ways which I would try first. But I pray you, good Sir John, to tell me of some of your noble spear-runnings against the French, for the whole land rings with the tale of your deeds, and I have heard that in one morning 3 champions have fallen before your lance. Was it not so? That it was indeed so these scars upon my body will prove, but these were the follies of my youth. It is right that you should think so, Nigel. At your age a man should have a hot head and a high heart. I also had both and fought for my lady's glove or for my vow or for the love of fighting. But as one grows older and commands men, one has other things to think of. One thinks less of one's own honor and more of the safety of the army. It is not your own spear, your own sword, your own arm, which will turn the tide of fight, but a cool head may save a stricken field. He who knows when his horsemen should charge and when they should fight on foot. He who can mix his archers with his men-at-arms in such a fashion that each can support the other. He who can hold up his reserve and pour it into the battle when it may turn the tide. He who has a quick eye for boggy land and broken ground. That is the man who is of more worth to an army than Roland, Oliver, and all the paladins. Yet if his knights fail him, honoured sir, all his head work will not prevail. True enough, Nigel, so may every squire ride to the wars with his soul on fire, as yours is now. But I must linger no longer, for the king's service must be done. I will dress, And when I have bid farewell to the noble Dame Ermintrude, I will on to Farnham. But you will see me here again on the day that the king comes." So Chandos went his way that evening, walking his horse through the peaceful lanes and twanging his atoli as he went, for he loved music and was famous for his merry songs. The cottagers came from their huts and laughed and clapped as the rich full voice swelled and sank to the cheery tinkling of the strings. There were few who saw him pass that would have guessed that the quaint one-eyed man with the yellow hair was the toughest fighter and craftiest man of war in Europe. Once only, as he entered Farnham, an old broken man-at-arms ran out in his rags and clutched at his horse as a dog gambols round his master. Chandos threw him a kind word and a gold coin as he passed on to the castle. In the meanwhile, young Nigel and the Lady Ermintrude, left alone with their difficulties, looked blankly in each other's faces. "The cellar is well nigh empty," said Nigel. "There are 2 firkins of small beer and a ton of canary. How can we set such drink before the king and his court? We must have some wine of Bordeaux. With that and the mottled cow's calf and the fowls and a goose, we can set forth a sufficient repast if he stays only for the one night. How many will be with him?" "A dozen at the least." The old dame wrung her hands in despair. "Nay, take it not to heart, dear lady," said Nigel. "We have but to say the word, and the king would stop at Waverley, where he and his court would find all that they could wish." "Never," cried the Lady Ermintrude. "It will be shame and disgrace to us forever, if the king were to pass our door when he has graciously said that he was fain to enter in. Nay, I will do it. Never did I think that I would be forced to this, but I know that he would wish it, and I will do it." She went to the old iron coffer, and taking a small key from a girdle, she unlocked it. The rusty hinges, screaming shrilly as she threw back the lid, proclaimed how seldom it was that she had penetrated into the sacred recesses of a treasure chest. At the top were some relics of old finery, a silken cloak spangled with golden stars, a coif of silver filigree, a roll of Venetian lace. Beneath were little packets tied in silk which the old lady handled with tender care, a man's hunting glove, a child's shoe, a love knot done in faded green ribbon, some letters in rude rough script, and a vernicle of St. Thomas. Then from the very bottom of the box she drew 3 objects, swathed in silken cloth, which she uncovered and laid upon the table. The one was a bracelet of rough gold studded with uncut rubies, the second was a gold salver, and the third was a high goblet of the same metal. You have heard me speak of these, Nigel, but never before have you seen them. For indeed I have not opened the hutch for fear that we might be tempted in our great need to turn them into money. I have kept them out of my sight, and even out of my thoughts. But now it is the honor of the house which calls, and even these must go. This goblet was at which my husband, Sir Loring, won after the intaking of Belgrade when he and his comrades held the list from matins to vespers against the flower of the French chivalry. The salver was given him by the Earl of Pembroke in memory of his valor upon the field of Falkirk. And the bracelet, dear lady, you will not laugh, Nigel? Nay, why should I laugh? The bracelet was a prize for the Queen of Beauty, which was given to me before all the high-born ladies of England by Sir Loring a month before our marriage. The Queen of Beauty, Nigel, I, old and twisted, as you see me. 5 strong men went down before his lance ere he won that trinket for me, and now in my last years. Nay, dear and honoured lady, we will not part with it. Yes, Nigel, he would have it so. I can hear his whisper in my ear. Honour to him was everything, the rest nothing. Take it from me, Nigel, ere my heart weakens. Tomorrow you will ride with it to Guildford. You will see Thorell the goldsmith, and you will raise enough money to pay for all that we shall need for the king's coming. She turned her face away to hide the quivering of her wrinkled features, and the crash of the iron lid covered the sob which burst from her overwrought soul. Chapter 7. How Nigel Went Marketing to Guildford. It was on a bright June morning that young Nigel, with youth and springtime to make his heart light, rode upon his errand from Tilford to Guildford town. Beneath him was his great yellow war-horse, caracoling and curvetting as he went, as blithe and free of spirit as his master. In all England one would scarce have found upon that morning so high-mettled and so debonair a pair. The sandy road wound through groves of fir, where the breeze came soft and fragrant with resinous gums, or over heathery downs, which rolled away to north and to south, vast and untenanted, for on the uplands the soil was poor and water scarce. Over Crooksbury Common he passed, and then across the great heath of Puttenham, following a sandy path which wound amid the bracken and the heather, for he meant to strike the pilgrims where it turned eastward from Farnham and from Seal. As he rode, he continually felt his saddle-bag with his hand, for in it, securely strapped, he had placed the precious treasures of the Lady Ermintrude. As he saw the grand tawny neck tossing before him, and felt the easy heave of the great horse and heard the muffled drumming of his hoofs, he could have sung and shouted with the joy of living. Behind him, upon the little brown pony which had been Nigel's former mount, rode Samkin Aylward the bowman, who had taken upon himself the duties of personal attendant and bodyguard. His great shoulders and breadth of frame seemed dangerously top-heavy upon the tiny steed, but he ambled along, whistling a merry lilt and as light-hearted as his master. There was no countryman who had not a nod and no woman who had not a smile for the jovial bowman, who rode for the most part with his face over his shoulder, staring at the last petticoat which had passed him. Once only he met with a harsher greeting. It was from a tall, white-headed, red-faced man whom they met upon the moor. "It'll becomes you to ask you any ado weel," said the old man. "You have angered the monks of Waverley, whose tenant I am, and they would drive me out of my farm. Yet there are 3 more years to run, and do what they may, I will bide till then. But little did I think that I should lose my homestead through you, Samkin, and big as you are, I would knock the dust out of that green jerkin with a good hazel switch if I had you at Crooksbury. Then you shall do it tomorrow morning, good father, for I will come and see you then. But indeed I did not do more at Waverley than you would have done yourself. Look me in the eye, old hothead, and tell me if you would have stood by while the last Loring, look at him as he rides with his head in the air and his soul in the clouds, was shot down before your very eyes at the bidding of that fat monk, if you would. Then I'd disown you as my father. Nay, Samkin, if it was like that, then perhaps what you did was not so far amiss. But it is hard to lose the old farm when my heart is buried deep in the good brown soil. God preserve us from the wenches, Samkin. But indeed I think that if there is money to be gathered, you are as likely to get your fist full as any man who goes to the war. But hasten, lad, hasten. Already your young master's over the brow." Thus admonished, the archer waved his gauntlet hand to his father, and digging his heels into the sides of his little pony soon drew up with the squire. Nigel glanced over his shoulder and slackened speed until the pony's head was up to his saddle. "Have I not heard, archer?" said he. "Then outlaw has been loose in these parts. How comes it that he has not been hunted down? If the man be a droll-etch and a robber, it would be an honourable deed to clear the country of such an evil. Twice the sergeants-at-arms from Guildford have come out against him, but the fox has many oaths, and it would puzzle you to get him out of them. There is a great morass beyond Puttenham, and across it there are caves in which he and his people lurk. There are several with him." "It sounds a most honourable enterprise," said Nigel. "When the king hath come and gone, we will spare a day for the outlaws of Puttenham. I fear there is little chance for us to see them on this journey. They prey upon the pilgrims who pass along the Winchester road, and they are well loved by the folk in these parts, for they rob none of them and have an open hand for all who will help them." "It is right easy to have an open hand with the money that you have stolen," said Nigel. "But I fear that they will not try to rob 2 men with swords at their girdles like you and me, so we shall have no profit from them." They had passed over the wild moors and had come down now into the main road by which the pilgrims from the west of England made their way to the national shrine at Canterbury. It passed from Winchester and up the beautiful valley of the Itchen until it reached Farnham, where it forked into 2 branches, one of which ran along the Hog's Back, while the second wound to the south and came out at St. Catherine's Hill, where stands the pilgrim shrine, a grey old ruin now, but once so august, so crowded and so affluent. It was this second branch upon which Nigel and Aylward found themselves as they rode to Guildford. No one, as it chanced, was going the same way as themselves, but they met one large drove of pilgrims returning from a journey with pictures of St. Thomas and snail shells or little leaden ampullae in their hats and bundles of purchases over their shoulders. They were a grimy, ragged, travel-stained crew, the men walking, the women borne on asses. Man and beast, They limp along as if it will be a glad day when they saw their homes once more. These and a few beggars or minstrels, who crouched among the heather on either side of the track in the hope of receiving an occasional farthing from the passerby, were the only folk they met until they had reached the village of Puttenham. Already they was a hot sun and just breeze enough to send the dust flying down the road, so they were glad to clear their throats with a glass of beer at the ale stake in the village, where the fair alewife gave Nigel a cold farewell because he had no attentions for her, and Elwood a box on the ear because he had too many. On the farther side of Puttenham, the road runs through thick woods of oak and beech, with a tangled undergrowth of fern and bramble. Here they met a patrol of sergeants-at-arms, tall fellows, well-mounted, clad in studded leather caps and tunics, with lances and swords. They walked their horses slowly on the shady side of the road, and stopped as the travellers came up, to ask if they had been molested on the way. "Have a K," they added, "for the wild man and his wife are out. Only yesterday they slew a merchant from the west and took 100 crowns. His wife, you say? Yes, she is ever at his side, and has saved him many a time, for he has the strength it is she who has the wit. I hope to see their heads together upon the green grass one of these mornings." The patrol passed downward toward Farnham, and so, as it proved, away from the robbers, who had doubtless watched them closely from the dense brushwood which skirted the road. Coming round a curve, Nigel and Aylward were aware of a tall and graceful woman who sat, wringing her hands and weeping bitterly, upon the bank by the side of the track. At such a sight of beauty and distress, Nigel pricked Pomace with a spur, and in 3 bounds was at the side of the unhappy lady. "What ails you, fair dame?" he asked. "Is there any small matter in which I may stand your friend, or is it possible that anyone is so hard a heart as to do you an injury?" She rose and turned upon him a face full of hope and entreaty. "Oh, save my poor father," she cried. "Have you perchance seen the way-wardens? They passed us, and I fear they are beyond reach." "Yes, they have ridden onward, but we may serve as well." "Then hasten, I pray you. Even now they may be doing him to death. They have dragged him into yonder grove, and I have heard his voice growing ever weaker in the distance. Hasten, I implore you." Nigel sprang from his horse and tossed the rein to Aylward. "Nay, let us go together. How many robbers were there, lady?" "2 stout fellows." "Then I come also." "Nay, it is not possible," said Nigel. "The wood is too thick for horses, and we cannot leave them in the road." "I will guard them," cried the lady. "Pommers is not so easily held. Do you bide here, Aylward, until you hear from me. Stir not, I command you." So saying, Nigel, with the light of adventure gleaming in his joyous eyes, drew his sword and plunged swiftly into the forest. Far and fast he ran, from glade to glade, breaking through the bushes, springing over the brambles, light as a young deer, peering this way and that, straining his ears for a sound, and catching only the cry of the wood-pigeons. Still on he went, with the constant thought of the weeping woman behind and of the captured man in front. It was not until he was footsore and out of breath that he stopped with his hand to his side and considered that his own business had still to be done, and that it was time once more that he should seek the road to Guildford. Meantime Aylward had found his own rough means of consoling the woman in the road, who stood sobbing with her face against the side of Pommers' saddle. "Nay, weep not, my pretty one," said he. "It brings the tears to my own eyes to see them stream from thine. Alas, good Archer, he was the best of fathers, so gentle and so kind. Had you but known him, you must have loved him. No, I shall never see him more. Hold me, Archer, or I fall." Aylward pressed his ready arm round the supple waist. The fainting woman leaned with her hand upon his shoulder. Her pale face looked past him, and it was some new light in her eyes, a flash of expectancy, of triumph, of wicked joy, which gave him sudden warning of his danger. He shook her off and sprang to one side, but only just in time to avoid a crashing blow from a great club in the hands of a man even taller and stronger than himself. He had one quick vision of great white teeth clenched in grim ferocity, a wild flying beard and blazing wild beast eyes. The next instant he had closed, ducking his head beneath another swing of that murderous cudgel. With his arms round the robber's burly body and his face buried in his bushy beard, Aylward gasped and strained and heaved. Back and forward in the dusty road the two men stamped and staggered, a grim wrestling match, with life for the prize. Twice the great strength of the outlaw had Aylward nearly down, and twice with his greater youth and skill the archer restored his grip and his balance. Then at last his turn came. He slipped his leg behind the other's knee, and, giving a mighty wrench, tore him across it. With a hoarse shout the outlaw toppled backward, and had hardly reached the ground before Aylward had his knee upon his chest and his short sword deep in his beard, and pointed to his throat. "By these 10 finger bones," he gasped, "one more struggle and it is your last." The man lay still enough, for he was half stunned by the crashing fall. Aylward looked round him, but the woman had disappeared. At the first blow struck, she had vanished into the forest. He began to have fears for his master, thinking that he perhaps had been lured into some death trap. But his forebodings were soon at rest, for Nigel himself came hastening down the road, which he had struck some distance from the spot where he left it. "By St. Paul," he cried, "who is this man on whom you are perched, and where is the lady who has honoured us so far as to crave our help? Alas, that I have been unable to find her father." "As well for you, fair sir," said Aylward, "for I am of opinion that her father was a devil. This woman is, as I believe, the wife of the wild man of Puttenham, and this is a wild man himself who set upon me and tried to brain me with his club." The outlaw, who had opened his eyes, looked with a scowl from his captor to the newcomer. "You are in luck, archer," said he, "for I have come to grips with many a man, but I cannot call to mind any who have had the better of me." "You have indeed the grip of a bay," said Aylward, "but it was a coward deed that your wife should hold me while you dashed out my brains with a stick. It is also a most villainous thing to lay a snare for wayfarers by asking for their pity and assistance. So that it was our own soft hearts which brought us into such danger. The next who with real need of our help may suffer for your sins." "When the hand of the whole world is against you," said the outlaw in a surly voice, "you must fight as best you can. You well deserve to be hanged, if only because you have brought this woman, who is fair and gentle-spoken, to such a life," said Nigel. "Let us tie him by the wrist of my stirrup leather, Aylward, and we will lead him into Guildford." The archer drew a spare bowstring from his case and had bound the prisoner as directed, when Nigel gave a sudden start and cry of alarm. "Holy Mary!" he cried. "Where is the saddlebag?" It had been cut away by a sharp knife. Only the two ends of strap remained. Aylward and Nigel stared at each other in blank dismay. Then the young squire shook his clenched hands and pulled at his yellow curls in his despair. "The Lady Ermintrude's bracelet! My grandfather's cup!" he cried. "I would have died ere I lost them. What can I say to her? I dare not return until I have found them. Oh, Aylward, Aylward, how came you to let them be taken?" The honest archer had pushed back his steel cap and was scratching his tangled head. "Nay, I know nothing of it. You never said that there was aught of price in the bag, else had I kept a better eye upon it. Certes, it was not this fellow who took it, since I have never had my hand from him. It can only be the woman who fled with it while we fought." Nigel stamped about the road in his perplexity. "I would follow her to the world's end if I knew where I could find her, but to search these woods for her is to look for a mouse in a wheat field. Good St. George, thou who didst overcome the dragon, I pray you by that most honourable and knightly achievement that you will be with me now. And you also, great St. Julian, patron of all wayfarers in distress. 2 candles shall burn before your shrine at Godalming, if you will but bring me back my saddlebag. What would I not give to have it back?" "Will you give me my life?" asked the outlaw. "Promise that I go free, and you shall have it back, if it be indeed true that my wife has taken it." "Nay, I cannot do that," said Nigel. "My honour would surely be concerned, since my loss is a private one, but it would be to the public scathe that you should go free. By St. Paul, it would be an ungentle deed if in order to save my own I let you loose upon the gear of 100 others." "I will not ask you to let me loose," said the wild man. "If you will promise that my life be spared, I will restore your bag." "I cannot give such a promise, for it will lie with the sheriff and reeves of Guildford." shall I have your word in my favor? That I could promise you, if you will give back the bag, though I know not how far my word may avail. But your words are vain, for you cannot think that we will be so fond as to let you go in the hope that you return. I would not ask it, said the wild man, for I can get your bag and yet never stir from the spot where I stand. Have I your promise upon your honor and all that you hold dear that you will ask for grace? You have, and that my wife shall be unharmed. I promise it. The outlaw laid back his head and uttered a long, shrill cry like the howl of a wolf. There was a silent pause, and then, clear and shrill, there rose the same cry no great distance away in the forest. Again the wild man called, and again his mate replied. A third time he summoned, as the deer bells to the doe in the greenwood. Then with a rustle of brushwood and snapping of twigs the woman was before them once more, tall, pale, graceful, wonderful. She glanced neither at Aylward nor Nigel, but ran to the side of her husband. Dear and sweet lord, she cried, I trust they have done you no hurt. I waited by the old ash, and my heart sank when you came not. I have been taken at last, wife. Oh, cursed, cursed day. Let him go. Kind, gentle sirs, do not take him from me. They will speak for me at Guildford, said the wild man. They have sworn it, but hand them first the bag that you have taken. She drew it out from under her loose cloak. Here it is, gentle sir. Indeed it went to my heart to take it, for you had mercy upon me in my trouble. But now I am, as you see, in real and very sore distress. Will you not have mercy now? Take ruth on us, fair sir. On my knees I beg it of you, most gentle and kindly squire. Nigel had clutched his bag, and right glad he was to feel that the treasures were all safe within it. My proffer is given, said he. I will say what I can, but the issue rests with others. I pray you to stand up, for indeed I cannot promise more. Then I must be content, said she, rising with a composed face. I have prayed you to take Ruth, and indeed I can do no more. But ere I go back to the forest, I would rede you to be on your guard lest you lose your bag once more. What you how I took it? Archer? Nay, it was simple enough, and may happen again, so I make it clear to you. I had this knife in my sleeve, and though it is small, it is very sharp. I slipped it down like this. Then when I seemed to weep with my face against the saddle, I cut down like this. In an instant she had shorn through the stirrup leather which bound a man, and he, diving under the belly of the horse, had slipped like a snake into the brushwood. In passing he had struck Pommers from beneath, and the great horse, enraged and insulted, was rearing high, with two men hanging to his bridle. When at last he had calmed, there was no sign left of the wild man or of his wife. In vain did Aylward, an arrow on his string, run here and there among the great trees and peer down the shadowy glades. When he returned, he and his master cast a shamefaced glance at each other. I trust that we are better soldiers than jailers, said Aylward, as he climbed on his pony. But Nigel's frown relaxed into a smile. At least we have gained back what we lost, said he. Here I place it on the pommel of my saddle, and I shall not take my eyes from it until we are safe in Guildford town. So they jogged on together until, passing St. Catherine's shrine, they crossed the winding Wee once more, and so found themselves in the steep high street with its heavy caved gabled houses, its monkish hospitium upon the left, where good ale may still be quaffed, and its great square-keep castle upon the right, no grey and grim skeleton of ruin, but very quick and alert, with blazoned banner flying free, and steel caps twinkling from the battlement. A row of booths extended from the castle gate to the high street, and two doors from the church of the Trinity was at Thorold the goldsmith, a rich burgess and mayor of the town. He looked long and lovingly at the rich rubies and at the fine work upon the goblet. Then he stroked his flowing grey beard as he pondered whether he should offer 50 nobles or 60, for he knew well that he could sell them again for 200. If he offered too much, his profit would be reduced. If he offered too little, the youth might go as far as London with them, for they were rare and of great worth. The young man was ill-clad, and his eyes were anxious. Perchance he was hard-pressed, and was ignorant of the value of what he bore. He would sound him. These things are old and out of fashion. Fair sir, said he, of the stones I can scarce say if they are of good quality or not, but they are dull and rough. Yet, if your price below, I may add them to my stock, though indeed this boot was made to sell and not to buy. What do you ask?" Nigel bent his brows in perplexity. Here was a game in which neither his bold heart nor his active limbs could help him. It was a new force mastering the old, the man of commerce conquering the man of war, wearing him down and weakening him through the centuries until he had him as his bondservant and his thrall. "I know not what to ask, good sir," said Nigel. "It is not for me, nor for any man who bears my name, to chaffer and to haggle. You know the worth of these things, for it is your trade to do so. The Lady Ermintrude lacks money, and we must have against the king's coming. So give me that which is right and just, and we will say no more." The goldsmith smiled. The business was growing more simple and more profitable. He had intended to offer 50, but surely it would be sinful ways to give more than 25. "I shall scarce know what to do with them when I have them," said he. "Yet I should not grudge 20 nobles if it is a matter in which the king is concerned." Nigel's heart turned to lead. This sum would not by one half what was needful. It was clear that the Lady Ermintrude had overvalued her treasures. Yet he could not return empty-handed. So if 20 nobles was the real worth, as this good old man assured him, then he must be thankful and take it. "I am concerned by what you say," said he. "You know more of these things than I can do. However, I will take." 150, whispered Aylward's voice in his ear. 150, said Nigel, only too relieved to have found the humblest guide upon these unwonted paths. The goldsmith started. This youth was not the simple soldier that he had seemed. That frank face, those blue eyes, were traps for the unwary. Never had he been more taken aback in a bargain. "This is fond talk and can lead to nothing, fair sir," said he, turning away and fiddling with the keys of his strong boxes. "Yet I have no wish to be hard on you. Take my outside price, which is 50 nobles." "And 100, whispered Aylward. "And 100, said Nigel, blushing at his own greed. Well, take 100, cried the merchant. "Fleece me, skin me, leave me a loser, and take for your wares the full 100. "I should be shamed forever if I were to treat you so badly," said Nigel. "You have spoken me fair, and I would not grind you down. Therefore, I will gladly take 100. "And 50, whispered Aylward. "And 50, said Nigel. "By St. John of Beverley," cried the merchant, "I came hither from a north country, and they are said to be shrewd at a deal in those parts. But I had rather bargain with a synagogue full of Jews than with you, for all your gentle ways. Will you indeed take no less than 150? Alas, you pluck from me my profits of a month. It is a fell morning's work for me. I would I had never seen you." With groans and lamentations, he paid the gold pieces across the counter, and Nigel, hardly able to credit his own good fortune, gathered them into the leather saddlebag. A moment later, with flushed face, he was in the street, and pouring out his thanks to Aylward. "Alas, my fair lord, the man has robbed us now," said the archer. "We could have had another 20 had we stood fast." "How know ye that, good Aylward?" "By his eyes, Squire Loring. I have little store of reading where the parchment of a book or the pinching of a blazon is concerned, but I can read men's eyes, and I never doubted that he would give what he has given." The two travellers had dinner at the monk's hospitium, Nigel at the high table and Aylward among the commonalty. Then again they roamed the high street on business intent. Nigel bought taffeta for hangings, wine, preserves, fruit, damask table linen, and many other articles of need. At last he halted before the armourer's shop at the castle yard, staring at the fine suits of plate, the engraved pectorals, the plumed helmets, the cunningly jointed gorgets, as a child at a sweet shop. "Well, Squire Loring," said what the armourer, looking sidewise from a furnace where he was tempering a sword blade, "what can I sell you this morning? I swear to you by Tubal Cain, the father of all workers in metal, that you might go from end to end of Cheapside and never see a better suit than that which hangs from yonder hook." "And the price?" "Armour. To anyone else, 250 rose nobles. To you 200. "And why cheaper to me, good fellow?" "Because I fitted your father also for the wars, and a finer suit never went out of my shop. I warrant that it turned many an edge before he laid it aside. We worked in mail in those days, and I had as soon have a well-made thick mesh mail as any plates. But a young knight will be in the fashion like any dame of the court, and so it must be plate now, even though the price be trebled. Your rede is that the mail is as good. I am well sure of it. Hearken then, armor, I cannot at this moment buy a suit of plate, and yet I sorely need steel harness on account of a small deed which it is in my mind to do. Now I have at my home at Tilford that very suit of mail of which you speak, with which my father first rode to the wars. Could you not so alter it that it should guard my limbs also? The armourer looked at Nigel's small upright figure and burst out laughing. You jest? Squire Loring, the suit was made for one who was far above the common stature of man. Nay, I jest not. If it will but carry me through one spear running, it will have served its purpose. The armourer leaned back on his anvil and pondered while Nigel stared anxiously at his sooty face. Right gladly would I lend you a suit of plate for this one venture, Squire Loring, but I know well that if you should be overthrown, your harness becomes prize to the victor. I am a poor man with many children, and I dare not risk the loss of it. But as to what you say of the old suit of mail, is it indeed in good condition? Most excellent, save only at the neck, which is much frayed. To shorten the limbs is easy. It is but to cut out a length of the mail, and then loop up the links. But to shorten the body, nay, that is beyond the armourer's art. It was my last hope. Nay, good armour, if you have indeed served and loved my gallant father, then I beg you by his memory that you will help me now. The armourer threw down his heavy hammer with a crash upon the floor. It is not only that I loved your father, Squire Loring, but it is that I have seen you, half-armed as you were, ride against the best of them at the castle Tiltyard. Last Martinmas my heart bled for you when I saw how sorry was your harness, and yet you held your own against the stout Sir Oliver with his Milan suit. When go you to Tilford? Even now. Jenkin, fetch out the cob, cried the worthy Wat. May my right hand lose its cunning if I do not send you into battle in your father's suit. Tomorrow I must be back in my booth, but today I give to you without fee and for the sake of the goodwill which I bear to your house. I will ride with you to Tilford, and before night you shall see what can do. So it came about that there was a busy evening at the old Tilford Manor House, where the Lady Ermyntrude planned and cut and hung the curtains for the whole, and stocked her cupboards with the good things which Nigel had brought from Guildford. Meanwhile the squire and the armour sat with their heads touching, and the old suit of mail with its gorget of overlapping plates laid out across their knees. Again and again old Wat shrugged his shoulders, as one who has been asked to do more than can be demanded from mortal man. At last, at a suggestion from the squire, he leaned back in his chair and laughed long and loudly in his bushy beard, while the Lady Ermyntrude glared her black displeasure at such plebeian merriment. Then taking his fine chisel and his hammer from his pouch of tools, the armour, still chuckling at his own thoughts, began to drive a hole through the centre of the steel tunic.